Welcome to the Love Bite Plus panel discussion. And this panel is meant to inform everyone about what we call the love bite, alien interference in human love relationships, and the whole dynamic of interference in relationships from some kind of paranormal way. And we're going to talk a lot about what this is, what the symptoms are, how it manifests in your life, and many different aspects of this with several panelists today. And so I want to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is EVE LORGEN, and I'm the author of two books, The Love Bite, Alien Interference and Human Love Relationships, and The Dark Side of Cupid, which is about love affairs, the supernatural, and energy vampirism. So really this panel is based on what's in those two books and what we've learned over the years in research with what I call anomalous trauma, how love relationships in particular have been manipulated or orchestrated, influenced, disrupted, or set up in some way by the sources that we deem to be either ETs, aliens, or sometimes humans, black magicians, sorcerers, or interdimensional beings. So it's actually quite a bit. And this is all really defined in my books pretty well. So today, I'm here to talk about this, but there's also several of us joining today. And I'd like to introduce just briefly the people who are going to be here in the discussion. James Bartley, as you know, is a colleague of mine that we've worked for many years doing alien abduction research and support groups together. And we've been doing this for something like over 20 years now. I stopped counting years, but and then also Tom Montauk and Carissa Conte. They've done a lot of their own research over the years. And we have Bernard Gunther, and he's had a lot of experiences himself. And Aurela Eliora is someone who's joining us, who's had personal experience with the love bite as well, and has started her own research in many aspects. And Laura Leone, my colleague, has also done research, had personal experience. In fact, all of us here have had our own personal experiences related to, quote, the love bite in some capacity. So that's why we're all here. Not only have we had personal experience, but we've done our own individual research, which really goes into many different areas that's very relevant today. So I guess what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start off with really defining, quote, what is the love bite? And I know it sounds funny. It's a funny term. It actually started many years ago as the alien love bite. And it was people who've had multiple alien abduction histories who realized over their course of their lives that they had relationships that were being manipulated or orchestrated or actually set up by the aliens that were visiting them, or we call them alien handlers. And so that phrase actually stuck, the alien love bite, and then we later really just called it the love bite. But in actuality, we actually learned this from people who had multiple alien visitation histories or alien abductions. And those kind of people had those kinds of reports that their relationships were definitely not only being set up, but they were being orchestrated or manipulated or broken off. And so over the years, what I realized is not just this subpopulation is actually experiencing this phenomena. There's many people who experience some kind of interference in the relationship from what I call a paranormal factor, for lack of a better term, or what we call a third-party entity type of visitation, which could be a type of interdimensional being, but it could also be an alien or an ET. It could be a military. It could be some MK Ultra handlers. It could be a sorcerer. It could be demons. It could be angels. So there's actually a lot of different kinds of beings and modes in which this can happen. So I guess what I can do is just give you the general symptoms of what this is so people could recognize it as opposed to, let's say, a quote, a regular relationship or a relationship where this is not happening. And we'll talk more in detail about all of that. So I'm just reading some bullet points. This is actually based on my book, The Love Bite. And the definition and symptoms are basically alien abduction history or ET contact, or sometimes they just call it visitations because they can be both physical and what we call astral or interdimensional. Bonding scenarios of various kinds recalled in abduction-related dreams with a person who is what we call the targeted partner. And sometimes, several times, this happens under different circumstances in trauma or relational, sexual, and also what we call astral sexual unions or meldings. These kinds of things are remembered often in dreams, but sometimes they're remembered very distinctly as an abduction event. A love obsession is like one of the huge symptoms, because that tends to follow after these bondings take place on these other more subtle levels. So a love obsession in one or both partners can take place after one of the abductions or astral dreams, for example. Switching off or psychic unplugging of one partner, leaving the other unrequited and pining away in yearning, obsession, grief. And this is something that was clearly observed as part of the whole scenario of the love bite. And Barbara Bartholick, one of my colleagues, helped me understand this in greater detail. The switching off and what we call the psychic unplugging was a big part of that. General emotional turmoil during the drama of the love obsession. Increased alien abductions or visitations during the duration of the love obsession. Stage managed dreams and virtual reality scenarios. Trainings with the other partner. And we're going to go into detail about what all this is also. Supernatural and paranormal events, and also a lot of synchronicities regarding the targeted partner, which suggests that they are the one or the soulmate, love, twin flame kind of thing. Oftentimes Kundalini activation can happen with that. And it also can increase those people's psychic abilities as a result. And then, when the switching off occurs and there's a lot of drama, what we'll notice is the exhaustion and a persistent sense that one is still psychically connected to the love bite partner, even after the relationship or obsession is over. There's still a psychic link going on. Emotional and telepathic linking with the love bite partner during the bonding phase and sometimes afterwards. And like I said, the psychic abilities could increase during this phase as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and during the discussion, we'll kind of talk about what are the reasons why, quote, the aliens are doing this. Or in cases of what I call the military abduction scenario or the MILABs, there's also reasons for this. And there's different kinds of love bites, which we'll talk about in more detail. So I'm not going to go through all the reasons because we'll discuss that as part of the overall discussion. And before I go off into saying any more, the dark side of Cupid, the reason why I wrote the book was because so many people were having similar symptoms as, quote, the alien love bite. But over the years, these people didn't necessarily remember themselves to have alien visitations or abductions or UFO sightings, but they had a lot of the same symptoms of what I actually recognized later to be the dynamic of energy vampirism and the high emotional drama, the emotional highs and the crashing lows, and the sense of being watched, a sense of being under a spell, the love obsession. So I wrote a book called The Dark Side of Cupid, which actually describes that in a different way, which goes more into the dynamics of when this is happening. There's an energy vampirism factor. Sometimes there's a psychopathology factor with one partner, for example, who might be a narcissist or a borderline personality disorder. Or in most cases, there's some kind of third-party entity around that is actually manipulating or influencing the relationship in some way. And in cases where there was overt awareness that one person was actually hosted or possessed by some kind of interdimensional being, such as a reptilian or a demon or a snake being or any number of beings that have been described. And that's actually in my book, The Dark Side of Cupid, with images of that. So anyway, so this could be interdimensional beings that they're not even connected to the alien abduction phenomena, but there is sometimes there's a demonic element or an interdimensional element that's really responsible behind the scenes engineering this whole energy vampirism thing. So that's actually huge, and actually channeling plays a big part in this. If the spirit guides are some kind of interdimensional being that's actually acting as a energy parasite or a psychic vampire kind of thing. So I think what I'll do is, and I want to go ahead and just say a little bit about Barbara Bartholick, because she was actually the one who really helped me understand this whole alien love bite thing. And I would have never really known as fast as I did if it hadn't been for Barbara Bartholick, because I was running a support group in the early 90s with James Bartley in Fallbrook, California. And during that time, many of us in the group were undergoing the same obsession kind of situations where we were being in these abduction scenarios, or what we call stage managed dreams, where the targeted partner would be there and there would be different scenarios being played out for how we responded to a particular person. So it's actually the aliens or the handlers who were responsible for using this, whatever this technology is, was actually engineering a lot of these love obsessions that were all going on at the same time. So luckily, it played out more favorably because Barbara Bartholick was able to help us understand what was happening, and that she had seen this for years, that the aliens had been doing this kind of thing for years, and especially the reptilians. So, and also Dr. Carla Turner, who was mentored by Barbara Bartholick, who also wrote several books, was one who brought that out into the ufology community and abduction community with the Ted Rice case called Masquerade of Angels. And in that book, I actually took sequences of that case study, and the love bite portion is in my love bite book. So in Ted's case, he was bonded with, actually it was alien grays who were responsible for some of the bonding he remembered, but he thought they were angels in his first screen memory until they got through the screen layers of the memories and found out that they were alien grays doing this with him and another woman that he went to school with, and he was 14. So anyway, Barbara helped us understand that there's so much more to this, and a lot of what people remember from their alien experiences may not even be the actual experience, that there could be screen memories of something much more pleasant, which is part of the programming that could take place with some of these love bites. And that's what we've realized over the years, that there's this whole syndrome that plays out that could be a result of another kind of programming, actually. So without further ado, I think I will just hand it over to James Bartley, where he can just kind of take it from here on, his understanding of what he learned from Barbara Bartholick and his own experiences, and we'll just open it up to discussion. So I'll just be quiet now and let James take the floor.
Thank you for that introduction, Evie. My name is James Bartley, and I myself have had alien abduction experiences, investigating alien abductions, military abductions, and various aspects of the UFO situation for 25 some odd years. Evie and I are longtime colleagues. Years ago, she and I had run a support group, and around the same time, we all began to notice that of us were going through this alien love bite situation. And without going into too much detail, I will just touch on the bare essentials of it so we can keep the discussion flowing. Our emotional, energetic resonators. We as human beings have an emotional body, and we are by nature emotional, empathic, and these archontic negative beings strive to shunt us in the lower end of the emotional vibrational spectrum. One of the key ways they do this is through emotional energetic harvesting. And the alien love bite, the dark side of Cupid, the drama of the love obsession, as Barbara Bartholick described it, is a key facet. We were fortunate at the time to have the wise counsel of Barbara Bartholick to help us through this very critical period of time. I can say that in my personal case, Barbara helped me out a lot because she explained the inner dynamics and provided a conceptual framework for what the alien love bite is. There is a lot of denial which an individual going through this must first overcome, because our emotions are dear to our hearts. They in many ways define us as sentient human emotional beings, and to have our emotions used against us in this fashion, especially in regards to our seeming connection to another person we feel a strong attraction to me, that's about as low a blow as it can get. And so just wanted to point out that the seminal role that Barbara Bartholick played in providing a conceptual framework for all of us that were going through this. We began to implement her teachings in our support group and individually with each person in our group that was having these issues. So I think that that's enough of a background for me at the moment. So if anyone else would want to pick up from that.
I think we'll just go ahead and have each person do a short introduction before we launch into more in-depth discussion. So maybe Tom and Carissa can go ahead and introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, so I'm the author of montauk.net, and that's where I have a bunch of articles up there about all sorts of fringe topics, from the alien agenda to the matrix control system, spirituality, synchronicity, forbidden science, forbidden history, and all this kind of thing. And, ever since I was a kid, I also had alien experiences, which I consciously remember without any sort of hypnosis sessions or anything. And starting in my teens, I started having some military abduction-related symptoms as well. And that's because my stepdad was in the military, and because I took certain standardized tests in high school, which kind of put me on the map as far as intelligence and, things like that. So, and over the years, what I've been trying to do is correspond with literally thousands of people over the past 2 decades, getting their experiences, their insights, and taking this entire body of data and trying to boil it down to the bottom line, and then package it in a clear and concise way with the world so that they can kind of make up their own mind about what's going on. So that's what I'm doing.
I'm Carissa Conti, and I'm the author of a website called in2worlds.net. It's in the number 2 worlds.net. And it's basically a website kind of encompassing a wide range of fringy topics, everything from abductions in my labs and mind control subjects, as well as synchronicity, parallel timelines, reality glitches, and hyperdimensional interference. And it's all coming from firsthand experience. So it's articles and free books available to people where I'm writing from personal experience. So I don't write about anything that I haven't experienced or which I don't know something about. And so I kind of use my experiences as a platform to put these subjects out there and then try to get to the bottom of what's happening here. And, what is this place where, what is this reality and what's really happening here? Because what we've been told is not what it is. And so, and I use my experiences to try to introduce these topics and propose theories and ideas and just kind of get to the bottom of what's happening in this reality.
Thank you. Does Bernard like to introduce himself?
Mute. Okay. Hey, my name is Bernhard Gunther, and I have a blog called Veil of Reality, which is I've had for many, many years, and I just share my research and experiences relating to different topics, spirituality, psychology, even history, but also the hyperdimensional matrix control system. And in my personal journey, I grew up in Germany and moved to the United States in 1994. To pursue music career, to study drums and percussion, because it helped me just to deal with my emotions, also to express myself, because I never really could fit into the world. And that really started my path of questioning, and literally by my own suffering forced me to figure myself out, to ask questions, to question the reality of this world and official culture. And the more I questioned, the more I was seeking. Eventually I came across the UFO topic. Right. And at first, for me, the whole UFO topic is such a huge swamp. And what I realized, that most people have this assumption that it's this nuts and bolts approach, that these are, physical aliens from a physical planet and physical spaceships, like a Star Trek scenario, visiting Earth and whatnot. But, I came across Tom's work, over 10 years ago, which introduced me more to the hyperdimensional aspect, and then also got into Carla Turner's work and your work, and started writing more about it on my blog, and also produced a UFO documentary with a friend, which exposed more the hyperdimensional aspect of the UFO phenomena and the abduction phenomena, the dark side, so to speak, right? And ever since, after that release of that video 4 years ago, and my work being more public, I experienced high strangeness occurrences in my life, and my relationships changed, which had the imprint of a dark side of Cubit. Not too much alien love bite, because the I don't really can relate to the typical abduction, characteristics, which doesn't mean I haven't been abducted. I don't know. It could be, we don't know that, right? So, but that has been quite a ride over the past 4 years, and speaking more out about it seemed to have attracted some sort of attention towards me with these kind of attacks, working through others, and getting myself into some of these alien love bite type relationships. And in my own work, I'm also was led to the healing arts. So I work with people one-on-one, be it through body work or also holistic coaching. And I've noticed over the years, especially now, that's why I'm really happy we're doing this roundtable. More and more people are becoming aware of this topic, are actually open to talk about it and share their experiences, vulnerabilities. They seek help because it cannot be, these relationship issues they have, what they encounter cannot be explained through normal psychology or regular just relationship stuff, because it has this, it's, abnormality, this paranormal characteristics to it. So, yeah, in that sense, that's basically my story, and I feel this is really, really important that we have this roundtable to really help people to, with this knowledge and information.
That's great. Thank you. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Laura Leon, and I have a website that I've just started, sovereignkeys.com. And the premise of that are the keys towards our sovereignty that will aid us in battling all of these interferences that we have all, in one way or another, experienced and or are victims of. So how I came into this all is because I am a long-time abductee, my lab from the get-go. So I came in with the consciousness and was targeted at a young age, and have had to survive a lot of massive interference and experiences which couldn't be blocked from my memory. So not to mention the medical proof related to 2 implant removals, surgeries that had to take place with no scientific explanation. The list is large. And I think just like everyone here, we have background in personally experiencing the love bite and or the dark side of Cupid, or both together, because sometimes they go hand in hand. This led me into a deep passion into what I call the anomalous forensic psychological profiling, because I realized that they profile us. When I say they, I mean, it can be the aliens, the mylabbing aspect, it can be all of the various interfering forces that are at work profile us. And based on those profiles, they set us up. So I ended up going to university for psychology, sociology, anthropology, just to have a deeper basis and understanding into these psychological dynamics that they implant in us and groom us in, exactly to have us land right in a love bite, right in a dark side of Cupid, right in the entire situation of a setup. So the passion really is like all of us. It's from anywhere from abductions, the understanding of how these black ops operate, the demonic realms, the spiritual battle against amnesia, the cognitive struggle that we have with all of the interference that has been put in place to keep us from ever reaching any real answers and the truth. So all of us come by all of this through a great deal of experience and struggle and research and connecting. And I'm just proud to be a part of this experience. And yeah, my aspect is really to go into a deeper understanding of these anomalous psychological setups that that are groomed for this. Thanks.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I mean, you said it well, because there is so much to this, and we're learning more and more all the time. So, and then we'd like to introduce Arella Eliora. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Evie. My name is Arella, and first of all, I would like to thank you all for this opportunity to share my experiences with you. And I really appreciate to have been included in this panel. I'm a French Mexican based in Latin America, and I have a lot of also interaction with Spain. And I basically started all this research some years ago when I really got swept into the New Age movement. And well, I can testify how dangerous the New Age indoctrination really is, because I felt for many of its programs, and then I started questioning them. And I was able to get out of it after 2 years of being very heavily into the New Age teaching. I was a Reiki master. I got into several healing modalities like Theta Healing, Access Consciousness, Tarot Reading, Kabbalah, all sorts of metaphysic things that they teach in the New Age. And well, I had a lot of psychic activity back then, and I do have memories of abductions. I don't think they were actually physical, but they were astral. And I remember the experiences of being implanted by entities, by beings. I started channeling information from entities I used to call my guides, who presented themselves as ETs, positive ETs. And they were saying things to me about the universe, the cosmos. And at the same time, I started experiencing love bites and dark side of the Cupid scenarios. And they basically tried to stage me to be with a black magician. And they were presenting him as the twin flame. So basically, this is how I came to all this research. I was very involved also in the twin flame communities in English and in Spanish, both. And I knew most of the gurus and the healers related to twin flames. And I even created a group where I had thousands of people already, especially ladies from Latin America and Spain. And they were all sharing their stories and, well, talking about their twin flames and everything. But as time went by, the group really transformed into some kind of research, because every day I was getting weird stories from the members saying what was happening to their lives, to the connections. And I started seeing that they were really devastated. They were very deceived. They were confused. They didn't understand what was going on. And I started to think that there was something that was really not right. Something was off. So when I started trying to find answers to my situation and also this lady's situation, I found your website, Eve, and that basically started my own research. And now I have come to the conclusion that the Twin Flame program from the New Age is part of an agenda, maybe either to bring people together by these entities for their purpose, or to disrupt or bring down a person they know in the future could be researching or exposing them. But currently I run a blog and a Facebook page and a YouTube community in Spanish. It's called Camino al Regreso del Balance. And I'm trying to support the people who are basically very much in the program of the Twin Flames and try to realize what is going on with them. And I just recently also with my partner launched an English blog also called The Way of Balance. And we're trying to help people deprogram not only by the New Age, but also by all this indoctrination regarding twin flames.
That's awesome. You've got a lot of experience, and as we said, there's so much to this that we're starting to figure out through what we're seeing is like a kind of programming that's happening on subtle levels and sometimes really overt levels from different beings. Sometimes it's humans, sometimes maybe it's an MK Ultra thing or a alphabet soup agency thing, but there's definitely beings involved on an interdimensional level that is no doubt in my mind. It's not something that we're just making up. It's real. I think one of the things that I wanted to add before we just kind of got into more of a discussion was some of the reasons, at least for the love bite, that I hypothesized is because many people wanted to know what that was, especially in the early days of ufology and abduction research. They really were more interested in what they call the hybrid breeding program and that kind of thing. And I know that that's part of what happens in the alien abduction and alien visitation syndrome, that there's this hybridization thing going on. But what we realize is that that didn't necessarily take place when two people were orchestrated to be together in a relationship. And oftentimes they were married people, let's say, who were married to other partners, and there was not necessarily a child or a pregnancy as a result of the relationship. So what I actually put together about 5 or 6 reasons why this could be happening. And I'll just go through it briefly, and then we can talk about more of that in length if we want to as part of the discussion. So one of the first reasons that most people thought was to put people together for the genetic lines to have children. And sometimes alien-human hybrid creations from streamlined, altered genetic combinations, which I think they do in terms of, streamlining certain genetic combinations. But more often than not, what we really noticed was what I call the emotional, sexual, and life force harvesting energies to feed the aliens, who are essentially energy vampires. And that's what Barbara Bartholick knew right off the bat. The reptilians in particular were much more blatant in the way they were doing this. Another reason is to observe the genetic expression from strong obsessional bonding, even with other sexual partners or siring children, as in what we call the telegony theory. And there's not much really known about that, but it's basically that DNA can be imprinted in the woman's offspring from one of her original lovers that was maybe the first lover or the most powerful lover in her life. And then even if she had children later with another partner, that child may have characteristics from the original lover. So even though it wasn't their child. So I'm thinking there's something like that going on in the obsessive aspect, because in these love bites, the element of obsession and soul bonding is very strong. And then also what we learned with people having military and alien abduction combination experiences, or sometimes individually or together, what I call MyLab operations. 2 tantric pairs or twin pairs of, quote, abductees or MyLabs can be used together to maximize their psychic abilities, or what I call the psi ability output for special occult operations. Mind control operations in their alter personalities, for example. Tantric pairs can share information and intelligence and transfer this telepathically via tantric sexual union, or have telepathic communication due to the strong soul bonding that they have. And that's actually very common, the telepathic communication and downloading of mind files that takes place. And there's no trace, right? So that's a perfect intel operation of gathering and transmitting information. Sometimes a reptilian being has sexual relations with the MyLab operative to activate their kundalini initially. And then after that, this MyLab person, they are sent out on mind control ops with their expanded psychic abilities, for example, for remote viewing. And what will happen, and this happened with somebody we knew, and this happened repeatedly, a reptilian being would enter her bedroom and through an interdimensional portal and basically enter physically, although sometimes he wasn't visible, but it was as if he was physically present and could be felt palpably, like on the bed would depress and she would feel him as if basically he was having sex with her right there. And then the being would activate her kundalini, because the reptilians are masters at that. And then after that, the reptilian would leave, and then the military would come and then take the woman and use her on mind-controlled operations. It usually had to do with intelligence gathering and remote viewing. So that was really interesting, seeing how these things happen. And what more often than not, what we saw, the love bite happened with a lot of disruptions of relationships, like disruptions of true love, or relationships that could be helpful for the person in their healing and recovery or their awareness process. So more often than not, these MyLab people in particular, or abductees, once they're on the awakening process, they'd be thrown a love bite relationship. And then the love bite targeted partner would be sent in on them to basically stop the process, or to act as a handler in some capacity, or actually to prevent them from actually being able to explore more of their healing and awareness and sovereignty. So basically keep them in the program, basically. And sometimes this targeted partner, who was the MyLab handler, sometimes they weren't consciously aware of how they were being used, because they may still be under mind control. So there's a lot of that going on. as well as like blatant ones, like you hear in the MK Ultra or the Monarch programming people. And then the last reason, the disruption of true love or even true twin flames, because true love is very powerful and it's very healing, and it is a threat to the negative agendas and beings behind those agendas, because love will help people expand their awareness and become very powerful. And so if these beings behind these negative agendas are controlling and parasitic, they want to keep us dummied down and compromised as much as possible. And that means taking away true love and then inserting their puppet love bite partners or false twin flames. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop here. And if there's anything that somebody else might want to add on to any of those reasons, or like personal experience having to do with having been set up or somebody they know. So I'll just kind of let anybody else who wants to take the floor to chime in.
I was just going to add or ask you, because you in your book, Dark Side of Cupid, you have also a list of target groups, certain people that more, maybe targeted than others. Maybe you can share that as well.
Yeah, well, the targeted thing is huge. And I think I mentioned that more in the Dark Side of Cupid, because over the years we started seeing patterns. Well, like, how come so many people are getting stuck in these relationships? And I felt there's a targeting aspect, especially, women would come to me and they were somebody who was on the healing path and they had a lot of awareness. They were super psychic. They were able to do things that other people couldn't do. And I think it was because they shone so brightly and had a high quanta of life force energy and psychic ability that they would be targeted by interdimensional beings to be set up with like a love bite partner that was hosted or possessed by usually a reptilian being. And then they would be like it would feel like a soulmate thing. But then they realized that they were being disrupted and their energies were being harvested. And what happens in energy vampirism, one of the things that I didn't mention, is that energy and awareness are linked. So a lot of times when you get in a relationship with somebody who's, let's say, a hosted person or somebody who's possessed by one of these interdimensional beings that are acting as a vampire, not only do they get you linked in and love obsessed, but they take away energy. And as a result of taking away energy, your awareness is also compromised. So is your psychic abilities many times. So what happens is confusion sets in. So there's a lot of confusion when you have these relationships, and it's like almost like your critical thinking process just kind of gets shunted and you're under this spell. And the spell aspect is there's a lot of bliss that can happen when, let's say, they link into your energy field, let's say a specific chakra, for example, like the solar plexus or the root chakra or even the heart chakra. When they link in, it can create kind of an activation, and you could even have premature kundalini activation as a result of them linking in. So that actually can be very blissful and can activate some psychic abilities. But over time, if you stay linked in with the psychic vampire that's linking in, then eventually you will lose more energy and become exhausted. And then that's when the confusion sets in and the obsession may set in, because the bliss is like an addiction. It's like a love drug, like James Bartley has mentioned this. So anyway, so some people are targeted, especially people who are bringing out information, like alternative media, people who are bringing out a lot of truth about subjects that are meant to be kept hidden. So I think that happened in Bernard's case, actually, when you brought out those movies, those films, because it didn't happen until after that. And so I think that there's a lot of people who are actually being targeted this way by being sent in disruptors who are basically they're possessed or mind controlled or sent in because something else is running them, like an interdimensional being is actually running these people. And so that makes them easy puppets to target people who are basically really bringing in the true awareness. And so there's a targeting phenomenon actually. So yeah. So if anybody else wants to share on that.
Yeah, and maybe on that note, I can just share a little bit of what happened with me, because it was definitely your second point of, what I felt in my experience. It was definitely the emotional and sexual life force harvesting that happened. And also the confusion, element. I mean, this is, what I think I want to also say right at the get-go, because sometimes I get, I wrote a whole blog about my experience and in light of the research, but sometimes people ask, well, how is it any different from any other relationship issues? The stuff comes up, the trauma, but it's like, there's a saying, you don't really understand until you have experienced it. And this is just, relationship issues exponential, like it's just times 1,000 or something. It's just insane. But, the point you made, which is really the most confusing part, because it felt it's meant to be, with all these synchronistic like dreams of each other and projections and, orchestrated synchronicities as well, which is important to keep in mind, because a lot of the times you feel like when you experience a synchronicity, it means, oh, it's meant to be, but these synchronicities can be most often orchestrated by these entity beings, for their own agenda to bring two people together. And then this obsessive character, on both partners at the beginning, and then also the sexual experience can be always, in my case, so intense that it feels so beautiful and amazing and orgasmic, like Kundalini waking and everything, that you're just like, oh my God, this is just meant to be. This is love on its highest level, and just like, woo, 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 And I remember even 3-4 days being together with this woman and having the intense sexual experience. All of a sudden I got sick. Like I woke up the next day with a staph infection and just fever, and just like, it was intense, and there was no virus, no STD, nothing involved. It just felt just very weak. My life was just being sucked out, and it was fine. But then after I recovered a bit, I felt like okay, this is and I still we haven't really known each other, but we felt so intensely drawn to each other, and there was this conflict. Like part of me knew this is not right. I shouldn't be with it. This is not right. But I was so, my emotional center was just so attached to her, and the sexual center, like the cords, it was just like the push and pull is so extreme, And then on her, and she then even wanted, engage more in having more sex. I was throwing me off. So there was all this weird energy just based on this sexual feeding, which is very confusing without having established a grounding, emotional connection and whatnot. But it was up and down, literally looking back or looking from the outside, it would make no sense to anybody else. Everybody would say, what are you doing with her? Just, get out. But one day, literally in one day, I would just feel I'm totally in love with her. I just want to be with her. And just we had amazing times as well, blissful experiences, right? But then one trigger happened, something else, and just boom, down into, a whole can of worms open up, and conflict, and just draining. And I felt just weak and weaker and weaker. I mean, even my immune system was shutting down. That I got sick, and I'm a fairly healthy person. I have a healthy diet. Up to that point, I haven't gotten sick in over 4 years. And then I got sick twice within that relationship in a month. At the beginning. And then also towards the end, I even had to get into antibiotics because of, it was just needed. But that was just, that was the big, what you said, that confusion. It was driving me nuts, literally, I didn't know what the hell was going on. And even if I intellectually wanted to let it go, because emotionally I couldn't. It was just and I had so much pain and just a sensation in my third chakra, the solar plexus, just my own sense of power, my will, right? Being just weakened. And, then trying to work it out, also just working on just a purely psychological level, just didn't work for me, I had, in my own process, I also realized that I acknowledged, because I've taken responsibility for that experience as well, not to see myself, I'm being attacked, or, in this victim position. But I realized that I was attacked by getting to my own blind spots, my own psychological blind spots and issues, where these entities know exactly how to target, my own weaknesses, especially in regards to relationships or sexuality. So I had to really take a sincere look at that and really heal that and raise my vibration on a higher level to really transcend that kind of attention I was getting, so that kind of puts my experience in a nutshell, but others can share now maybe as well. Maybe actually I would like to hear James about this whole obsession thing, because I think he can relate to that as well.
Very good points you raise, Bernard. one thing that people understand is the seriousness of this. I've spoken to a few people, size to be sure, but it may be representative of a much wider pattern. But at times, the love bite scenario, the feeling of being on the love drug, the excitement, and the pull, and the ebb and flow of the emotions can be so extreme that it can literally trigger very serious life-threatening conditions. One of my dearest friends is absolutely convinced that her cancer was brought about because of a particularly virulent, for lack of a better term, alien love bite scenario went through, which lasted for a better part of 2 years with an individual clear on the other side of the country, the planet rather. Both of these individuals were extremely psychic. They met on Facebook, go figure. And they also had, and this is getting deeper into the subject, I won't go too far into it because we can bridge up to what I'm going to mention now. They apparently have past life connections, which played into this whole alien love bite scenario. And it basically, for a while, it ruined her relationship with her then partner. And it got so bad that this other guy, clear across the world, who was an adept in his own right, I guess some would even call him a sorcerer or a warlock, he began actually psychically attacking my friend's partner, my friend's partner, who's also a friend of mine. He's quite psychic and quite gifted too, and he could clearly see this guy in his bedroom at night, basically attacking him, and created this triangle where my friend's partner was resentful towards my friend. He was feeling spite and hate towards the person that my friend had become obsessed with, and went round and round. And the upshot was all of this, my friend is convinced, led up to the onset of her cancer, because her immune system was driven down so low by the emotional upheavals she'd been feeling. It must be understood by the viewers and listeners that it's very easy for one to get caught up in the excitement and the love drug feeling of the alien love. In my view, differentiates it from other attractions, other interpersonal romantic connections. One feels as though one is floating on a tidal wave of emotions, and it feels even internally as if your endocrinary system is causing all your glands to pump out a tsunami wave of hormonal secretions that make you and accentuates every emotion clear across the emotional spectrum, from jealousy to rage to confusion. And another example where the health aspects kick in is another close friend of mine. He was embroiled in an alien situation, which he himself believes was an alien love bite situation. And he went from an individual, in the span of just several months, an individual who was physically fit, who, like Bernard, was into physical fitness, working out, swimming constantly. And his physical and emotional state was reduced to its lowest possible level. And I thought at some point that he just may die because he was going through such emotional upheaval. It exacerbated all of his injuries from his past. He swims in order to keep his back in alignment. And all of these other issues he had with his teeth and his gums, and everything just flared up as he was going through this emotional alien love bite upheavals. That we can talk more about that later. But as far as some of the setups that Bernard talked about, a key aspect to understand is, just as the ETs and these little beings can put us together, they can also, and this is two sides of the same coin really, keep us, or some of us anyway, in a state of prolonged isolation where one is not having their emotional needs met because they find it well nigh impossible to form a lasting relationship with somebody. And we try to rationalize it sometimes, well, what could it be? Is it nice guy syndrome wherein, because we live in this harsh patriarchal society, and unfortunately many women have been programmed to respond only to males who exude this self-confidence, this boastfulness, this machismo. And on the other hand, individuals, males who are quiet, accountable, and quietly self-confident and not prone to boastful, making tough macho noises. It seems, even from an objective standpoint, and it can never be purely objective, but it seems that women will tend to, some women gravitate towards someone who is more of a type A personality. And so some males, and I've even spoken to female abductees, who, despite being quite attractive, they can find themselves in periods of long isolation too, due to trust issues, intimacy, inability to form intimacy, a variety of issues. So in practice, what it can seem like is a person can meet a gal, and then they seem to be getting along great, and then there's just a cutoff where, well, gee, what happened to her? Things seem to be going along all right. She seemed to like me, but I don't hear from her. I don't see her anymore, and so on and so forth. And when this only happens a couple of times, one could write it off as being, well, I don't have that way with women, et cetera, et cetera. But if it happens over a prolonged period of time, things begin to pile up in a cumulative fashion. The feeling of loneliness, the feeling of almost a feeling of disembodiment from not only society, but from oneself, because we are emotional beings, we are passionate beings by nature, some more than others. And to be lacking in that connection with someone, that's someone special, can be quite frustrating and can be quite aggravating even. And so when an individual like that is thrust into a love bite scenario, it's set up to be a perfect storm, because I see the inverse of that, where when people contact to get some insight into some of their experiences, I almost always, if I remember to, advise them that it's not unusual for them, now that they've contacted me, to wake up one morning and stressful towards me, suspicious towards me, even outright hostile towards me. And I tell these people that this is because these negative entities don't want to establish communications with me. And they will even go to the extent of manipulating the person's partner or family or friends, so will encourage the individual to not have anything to do with me. And finally, I tell them, they will even go to the extent of appearing to you in physical 3D, Chileans, Grays, so on and so forth, and mention me by name and say, don't have anything to do with James Bartley. They also do this to Eve Lorgen. They did this to Dr. Carla Turner, Barbara Bartholin. So I'm not the only one. So the inverse of that is this, what I'm talking about, this enforced isolation. And so things are set up where when a targeted love bite partner comes along, and then we got caught up in the excitement of it all. And because of the pre-programming from all the Hollywood movies and all the romance novels and so forth, we latch onto that, and we don't want to let go. And eventually what happens is the flood of emotions overwhelms our reasoning capability, and no longer able to reason our way through what's going on. And so this further leaves us ripe for the plucking, so to speak. So the imposed isolation is a key aspect of the part of the setup. And then what we have to do at that point is to recognize the inauthentic feelings, the stream heights of emotion. And like I said, it could vary, because if the person going through this love bite feels they're not getting their emotional needs met by the other person, and the really insidious part of it is then it's not only just this fusion of love and excitement and romance and whatnot. Then it's the opposite of that. It's feelings of resentment, of just perish the thought the other person begins dating other people, or whatever the case may be. And depending on the psychological profile, as Laura said earlier, because the psychological profiles are a key aspect, you can see how some people that are smitten with this love bite syndrome can not only develop obsessive compulsive behaviors, where they're just constantly consuming thoughts of the other person, murmuring their name out loud. Oh, Stacy, Stacy. They're just walking around in this daze. But then when the other emotions begin to kick in, of a feeling of rejection, resentment, jealousy, and that could boil over to rage. And even in the days before the internet, and some of the people that were afflicted in a very bad way with the alien love bite, they began acting out in ways which was borderline gang stalking, obsessively calling up the other person, driving past their home at night, things that we would associate as being stalking kind of behavior. So we just have to recognize when we're falling into these obsessive compulsive states of being and mindsets, and recognize the traps that not only have been set up for ourselves, but how we buy into those setups, and how, due to unmet needs, our longing, our lack of emotional fulfillment and contentment, we begin to buy into this fantasy that's been created for us. We begin to see that we create these illusions of how we can have a lifetime spent with this other person. So I just wanted to throw those points out, and anyone's free to comment about that.
I just wanted to, yeah, exactly. It reminds me of how, what I call the predator versus prey setup, where usually in the love bite situation, there's always one that's the predator, and then the prey, which is usually the more evolved out of the two. And usually in every one of the cases, you always see that one is functioning much more under the light, where they have, they're putting their life work into what they're doing, and it shows. And then they get sent. It's almost like these people that are predators, they know how to spot these victims, like they know it, and they can spot them, whether it's on a forum or whether it's wherever you are out. And usually these prey victims are very highly intelligent, psychic, evolved people. And this is the thing that's incredible to me, because when this happens, the predator typically has these narcissistic traits. But the narcissism is there's a cover-up happening, where they have this mask that they portray themselves as a victim as well. So the victim, actually, they're mirroring the victim. So there's a lot of mirroring happening in this whole setup that allows you to feel like, whoa, I'm really connecting with this person. And interestingly enough, the body has somatic responses when you connect with these people. Yet the insane thing is, you don't react or respond to those responses, and they're usually run away. Danger, danger, danger. And yet, even though you're feeling this intense danger, there you are, compelled, like you're under a spell. And they're mirroring specific things to you that allows you to feel this sense of familial, that you've known them forever, that you have so much that this person is like your family. And interestingly, when you diagnose these couples and you diagnose their upbringings, the partner on both sides are usually very typical of a parent that they had or a handler. So then it is a very interesting interplay that goes on, because I also call it the heaven and the hell response, because within the predator, there's always two personalities, and one is very heavenly, very good, very wonderful. And then, of course, they have the personality that is the narcissistic rage, the person who hides and reacts with the feelings, the traits that are all meant to keep you in this little cage. Yet you're addicted, but you've been groomed to be an addict. You've been groomed to be an addict of love. And addiction to love is a part of how we've been set up in our family upbringings, because we haven't been shown what's healthy either. So not knowing what's healthy just allows us to walk right into the snare, regardless of our somatic responses screaming at us to run away.
Yeah.
Basically, that which we haven't received as children, we try to seek outside of ourselves, which is the most basic set
Right.
of frustrated relationships.
And then the predator, for some reason, can mirror exactly what it is that you want.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's almost like mirroring, they're mirroring who you are, because see, you're always the more evolved. So you're going to, in essence, be falling in love with that mirror image.
Yeah. What ties in,
Are they?
we've mentioned with prey, the higher evolved, so to speak, the more sensitive one, also ties into empaths.
Mhm.
Empaths and codependents, because they've been groomed to be codependents, and they're always empathic. But so is the predator. The predator is also empathic. See, this is what makes this very complex.
Right.
Because you've got two psychic people, but they're both operating with different programs, and one is really great at mirroring. But you have to ask yourself, when you remove the mirror, when you start coming out of the spell, when you remove the mirror, what do you have inside that predator? Inside who's in there? Is there a personality? Is there, or did they just mirror what they knew that you wanted? Did they just mirror what they knew you are?
Well, that you could even tie that into the idea of quote-unquote organic portals, built as humans. I know Tom wrote about that these puppet people, who cannot activate the higher centers, mirror our soul potential. What we see in them is actually us, in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that in itself creates, wow, if you want to talk about utilizing people as portals.
Oh yeah.
How many portals do they create in these scenarios?
Yeah, that's probably the big thing that was figured out in the dark side of Cupid, that more often than not there was an interdimensional being running the targeted partner who had the more narcissistic predator characteristics, and they were being used to basically control and disrupt the other person until the other person woke up. But like you said, I think many people at least those who've had, let's say, alien abduction histories or MyLab or MK Ultra, or who had, let's say, narcissistic parents who are abusive, they're raised in ways where they never really knew love, or they may have shut down their feelings so that they're more vulnerable. But even with the abduction, the MyLab thing, they actually set your life up so that you don't get your needs met, and so that you're really hurting. And so then they bring you this carrot that's like the perfect lover, and of course you want to fall for it because you're so hungry. And so they create that, and it's like out of the frying pan into the fire. That's one of the programming things that they say in some of these Illuminati bloodlines. They do this on purpose. Like once you get out, then they've got something waiting for you that's already part of their tiered gauntlet of control system. So I've seen it that way. It's just that there's an interdimensional level that's playing this game and using people basically as portals until those people do their healing work and get rid of all that and start operating from their true core essence. And so the whole healing thing is so important, but we can only do our own healing. Obviously, we can't do it for somebody else.
Yeah. And interestingly, usually the predator, I mean, from what I found, is they're usually possessed. They're usually inhabiting something else that's driving them. And the traits connected to the predator are specific, very, very specific in terms of the destructive quality that they have and that they operate under. And oftentimes it doesn't even mean that they're conscious of it.
No.
They're being run. They're being literally run themselves, and they're a victim themselves.
I think that's important to keep in mind. What also have to learn to not make it personal.
No,
because then these entities feed off of that conflict and that friction when you make it in this interpersonal ego, battle, whatever. But then they are just portal for something else. And I've also learned when I would try to work it out, and my partner wasn't aware of it, it just makes things worse. You know what I mean? You got to really
because that's what I call inverted reality. Yeah. Okay, because the dynamic is always going to be that reality becomes inverted and twisted because you've always got one person who's functioning with personality disorders or emotional dysregulation, underdevelopment, so that they twist reality around, but they have enough credence in it so that it appears like it could be right, but it's not.
It's like trying to work out a relationship with the borderline. You kind of get in and then, something shifts, but then it's going to be turned around on you again.
Yeah, and then you're lost in it. And before you know it, you're not sure which way is up. Yeah. It's very
confused. And then you start self-doubting, but that's because they're so good at manipulation of reality. And I think that just calls to question how important it is for us to really stand in our core truth in our heart and to really know who we are, so that when these predator deceivers, because some of them are really, really good at what they do. I mean, I think some of them are hosted by some of the most intelligent, deceitful beings imaginable. And so to be able to really perceive that clearly takes a lot of resolve and a lot of healing and a lot of, getting your needs met so you're not vulnerable, because these beings are really, really good at what they do. I mean, they can get the best of us. And that's the thing. This is not really happening to us because we have a problem, because we're victims who haven't worked on our stuff. The truth is some of us really are targeted, and we have been working on our stuff, and we're targeted by these really high-level sorcerer host types. And we only discover it later after talking to other people and sharing, like, this is something, this is real. So
I also think there's some predators, or that they appear predator-like, who are actually the real deal. Like, let's say two real soul sparks are meant to be together. I don't like using twin flame anymore because it's just leaves a bad taste. But let's just say there are really two twin soul sparks that are meant to be together. Like Tom and Carissa, let's say, and that they're really good together, but they have been imprinted and overlaid to respond and react like they are love bites. So both are MyLabbed, both have been overlaid and imprinted so that they're functioning under the program due to how they've been manipulated. So then that begs to question, okay, so how do you distinguish between what's a real couple who've been MyLabbed, who are actually two real soul sparks that are meant to be together, and how do you find out the ones that are the imposters?
Well, in this sense, I would like to share my experience. The big problem is that when these kind of things happen, you start having all these synchronicities and experience and all that. Most people, I did it myself, we go online and we try to find answers there. And basically online, what you're going to find is a new age explanation of what's going on to you. So many ladies, they told me, well, I was starting to have the synchronicities, the dreams. I met this person. I felt this, and that. I went online, and what did I find? The twin flame. So when I spoke, for example, to these friends and told them, well, what if that guy they think is a twin flame? Maybe he's not. Maybe he's something else. Maybe he was not positive to your life. They could not even listen to me. They said that all this psychic stuff and all the feelings and all that was happening to them, they were told in dreams it had to be the twin flame. And when I told them if the guy is not good enough for them, or maybe the person is not even interested in them, and that they should try to date someone else, what they say is that they will be cheating on their twin flame. And they would not be able to do that to their twin flame because they're sure that it's him. And that became a very big psychological mess, an obsession, thanks to what they read in the New Age teachings. And one thing I saw is that all this time I have seen that there's a big link between the alien UFO phenomenon and the way the New Age is teaching things online and the agenda. And apparently this is nothing new. Apparently this is even an ancestral thing, and these beings are even mentioned in biblical texts. So this makes it even more deceptive and difficult to deprogram, because we're considering the fact that it involves spirituality, beliefs, and feelings of love and passion that can be very, very addictive. So you add to that, as Laura said, the personal traumas and the wounds to heal, and that makes it even more and more difficult to deprogram. So I think it's very important to address this, because you go online and you get flooded by the other teachings of the twin flames, but not many people are talking about this. And especially women, they are really falling for this twin flames program. And in most cases, I don't say maybe 100%, but maybe 90% of cases is a masquerade of the alien love bite.
Do you say anything about like cult leaders and cults, how people can get sucked into that? Maybe because they want some understanding about a twin flame thing, and they get sucked into certain cult leader teachings that may promote that, and then they find themselves getting sucked into something that's part of a program. Because I know that's an experience with several people here where they've observed channeling and then cult groups, and how they actually helped feed these interdimensional beings that are actually the predators. So I don't know if that's a topic we can kind of launch into.
Yeah, but before we get to that point, I think I want to reflect a little bit on what's been said so far. I mean, one of the big takeaways that you can, get from all this is that all these manipulations, they have to override your intuition. They have to override the genuine connection that you might have or not have with someone. So, if you're, like Laura was talking about, these warning signs, whether they're synchronistic. In my case, I've had dream warnings about people long ago. Dream warnings, synchronicities, so intuition, and even just like logical signs, like if the person is acting in a psychopathic or sociopathic way. I mean, there are like actual symptoms behind that. But the thing is, all these things can be overridden if they can pump you with enough programming. This mind control trance thing that they have going on, and of course that hormonal surge, which can be induced either telepathically, hypnotically, technologically, chemically. All these avenues are available for them to override what is the actual genuine signal within us. So one of the things that they can do is bring together people that might not necessarily have even a genuine connection. So we have different aspects of it. We have the one aspect where you don't have a genuine connection, but they use a hormonal surge to make you just 100% hyper extreme puppy love, in love with this person, right? Or they can just use simple mind programming where you feel like you're in a trance and like, I don't know why I'm going along with this, but I'm just going to go along with it, and you just kind of slide into that because the end result is the same. Either one will result in you being hooked up to this person, which then accomplishes whatever agenda needs to be accomplished, whether it's energy draining, whether it's trying to suffocate your spirit through just the negative influence of this person, the mind games that they play. And another thing I should mention is, these psychosomatic symptoms. Sometimes, it's just due to us undergoing these intense emotions, which, disrupt our subtle body energy mechanisms. But other times, it might also be due to energy contamination by the dark entities that are working through this other person who's acting as a portal for these entities. And it's been reported that greys, demons, reptilians, that they have an energy field that is very dark compared to yours. It's not compatible. So if you take that energy and you inject it into yourself, you're going to get sick. And sexual interaction is one of the most potent forms of energy transfer between two people that's possible, which is another reason why they would use that avenue, you know, if they're trying to get at you. So, you know, these are many of the things that that we have to watch for. And, you know, Bernhard, you brought up the idea of portals, spiritless humans, as I call them. And I've been trying to track, like, what kind of person is it that is so easily manipulated and moved into surrounding someone or hooking up with them or targeting them in order to bring them down. And generally what I found is these people tend to be extremely emotionally fractured. So it's almost like you take a soul and you kind of break it apart, and you have these voids in there, and these voids then act as portals through which these influences then can work, you know. Other times these people tend to be not too self-aware. So therefore, if you're not self-aware, then you can't self-correct yourself. And so if you have a whole lifetime of manipulation and contact and these entities working through a person, that person, by the time they're, you know, who knows what, 20, 30 years old, I mean, they're going to be pretty much like marionettes on a string, just because they've been groomed for such a long period of time. Yeah, so that's one of the general patterns that I've seen, is these people who are somewhat empty and fractured, you know, traumatized. So they're prime portals within our population, which can be moved at will by these forces to target anyone whom they really wish to target.
I mean, and on that note, I wanted to add that I have an experience in my own life that, I mean, it's exactly what all of you guys have just been talking about. It's somebody I mentioned in my book, Chasing Phantoms. It was an ex-boyfriend from years ago in the 90s named Steve. So if anyone's read my book, they'll probably know what I'm talking about. But this was a guy who, as a kid, I only realized this after we'd broken up. It seems very apparent he had been molested. His dad was NSA. So there's the military-industrial complex connection going on there. It's very important to mention. And they actually had lived for a period of time in Rockville, Maryland, which is the NSA headquarters. And they had thems that would always come around and check in with the neighbors to make sure the dad wasn't spilling military secrets, because he worked in nuclear engineering. And so that's his background. And it seemed like he'd been molested, I think, from more than one source. So he was severely fractured, was already addicted to drugs by the time he was 9, was rehabbed and done and over with it by the time he's 16. Very traumatized, very fractured, empty, like what you guys were describing. So I just give this backstory just to explain. So then I ended up being roommates with him and a bunch of other people. So we're all living under the same roof together. And, you know, he was like a very attractive guy, but I had no feelings for him ever in that way, because I always knew there's something really wrong and off about this guy. So that ties into what you guys have been talking about, overriding your intuition. I mean, I was young, I was 21, so I'm kind of, you know, stupid in a lot of ways, but aware in a lot of others. So I could tell there's something really off about this guy. So yeah, he's attractive, but not in that way. I don't want to be with him. But, you know, long story short, circumstances ended up happening where, and this is going to tie into, I know, a subject that we all have on our bullet point list. We're going to get more into detail later. But false reality creation, where I did this stupid thing because I was single and I wanted to like intend to have a boyfriend. So I got this candle I had, which happened to be black. And I know I told Evie and Laura this story before, so you guys are familiar with it. But stupid me, I get a black candle and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to intend, I want a boyfriend. I'm ready for a relationship. Yeah, I want to find somebody. And I did this thing where I'm like intending with this candle for like a half an hour. So it's basically, and I had no idea what I was doing. It's like just naive and stupid. I didn't realize anything back then. And the very next day, my car was totaled in an accident. Just totaled, very bad car accident. Because of that car accident, I no longer had transportation to get to my job. So now I'm stranded in the house all the time. And long story short, that's where we start now spending time together every single day, where I would have normally been out and about. I would have been at my job, or I would have been off doing things. So now we're together every single day. And wouldn't you know, within 3 months we were together. We kind of fell into a situation, but it was because he kind of was working it for 3 months, and kind of just, it wore me down. So this ties into what Tom was just describing, of where, you just almost feel hypnotized, like you're just kind of going along with something that you wouldn't normally, and you're overriding intuition. So I just fell into this situation, but it felt like a hypnotic thing. It's not real. It's not a real attraction at all. It's not normal. And, you know, even when we were roommates, one of the big things that this guy he just had this agenda about wanting to convert me to be an atheist like him. So he was hardcore atheist, anti-spiritual, used to always say the same script that, you know, we're all just pieces of meat, and that one day it's lights out and that's the end. And it was this like script he always had. So, and he would try to get me into arguments when we were roommates to try to convert me into atheism. And, you know, then now I'm dating him. And so that just really continued. And he kind of eventually kind of worked me enough to convince me to try to be atheist and just see the world through this very anti-spiritual lens. And, you know, and I do take responsibility for all this. I'm not like trying to like, oh, I'm a victim and he made me do all these things. I mean, you know, we do have responsibility. I overrode my intuition. I knew better, and yet I continued with this anyway. And the reason being is because I was alone in life, very vulnerable. My family's out of the picture due to severe abuse. I mean, I have no relationship with my parents. And I'm alone and vulnerable and lonely. I didn't have a boyfriend. And so there's all these factors that, you know, made me susceptible, and why I kind of went along with things when I probably shouldn't have. And so, yeah, I ended up becoming an atheist and trying to turn my back on having a spiritual view of reality. And it was just, in retrospect, it was like, he was like being a handler. It was like he was there to try to handle me and keep me down. And the thing that defined him, it was very empty. I used to call him, like, I nicknamed him a robot back when we were just roommates, because he just seemed so emotionally cold and detached and just weird, and there's just something off about him. So he's just like this fractured, empty soul who things were working through. He probably also had mind control programming through the NSA connections. God knows what was done to him as a kid, because that's the whole thing about the MyLabs thing, is oftentimes targets of MyLabs, you have parents that are in the military, and things that are being done to them, they also do it to the offspring, and it's just this, you know, all the way down the line. It's a genetic thing. So God knows what was done to him. And I mean, and then it was just like, as a relationship wore on over about 3+ years, I slowly started to wake up, which I think you kind of mentioned more when you were talking. Somebody did. And you just start to wake up. It's like coming out of this daze. And I remember I was rereading my old journals from that time period, where I'm documenting the ups and downs of our turbulent relationship, because he was like a Jekyll and Hyde personality, where he was hot and then cold, hot, cold, flip-flop. And the thing about him also was that his personality, he was like the exact combination of both my parents. He had all the coloring and all the physical features of my dad, and the Jekyll and Hyde personality of my mother, and the controlling, bossy, authoritarian kind of personality also of my dad. So it was just like, if you combine both my parents together, you know, that's who he was. And I pulled that into my reality. Anyway, so I was rereading my journal, where I'm like, you can see as I'm waking up to, you know, this turbulent relationship where it's just up, down, and I was like, I'm rooting myself on, like when I was rereading it, like I was reading somebody else's story, like, you go girl, when I was seeing how I was waking up and questioning his mind games. He's always just trying to keep me down. And then I just kind of woke up, and eventually we broke up because I brought my brother out to California, which is a whole other story, trying to help him and fix him and whatever. So I broke up with Steve, and that's where I moved in with my brother as a roommate. We got a 2-bedroom apartment, and I was going to help take care of him and get him back on track in life. And so we had broken up, and then the epilogue of the story is, like, after we broke up, I had to go back to the apartment like that we used to live in together. About 3 weeks after we broke up, I was just getting a couple things I had left behind. And when he opened the door, it was like I was looking at a stranger. Like it, and when I've told you guys the story before, the only way I can describe how I felt, it was almost like embarrassment. Like I was embarrassed. Like, how did I spend 5 years of my life with this guy? It was 1.5 years as roommates, and then 3+ years as, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend. And I look at him now after only 3 weeks of being apart, and I feel like I don't even know him. It's like I woke up out of a daze, and I just had no idea, why was I with this guy? Like, who is he? Like, what is the? I was just like embarrassed. It's almost this weird, embarrassing shameful feeling that, you know, you had spent years with someone that you don't even know under a spell, you know. And so I tell this story, I don't mean, it's no disrespect to Tom, who I'm with now, because I was already over this guy before we even broke up. So, and then I actually spent years beating myself up over it, about why I was ever with him, how I allowed myself to get pulled into that situation. But I understand, I mean, the vulnerabilities I was facing at the time in my youth, where I'm alone and isolated. And, you know, he's 4 years older than me, and he was kind of very take charge personality, and it's just kind of swoop in and just, you know, took charge of that. And so I understand now how it happened, so I don't beat myself up over it anymore. But I just wanted to put that story in there because it encompasses all the things you guys have just been talking about. So I thought it was like a really good example to illustrate.
Can you describe his behaviors for people?
Yeah, well, it was, like I said, very cold and emotionally detached, disconnected, kind of empty, which is why I called him like a robot. Jekyll and Hyde personality flip-flopping. So he's hot one moment, and then he just all of a sudden will just switch. Yeah, which ties into the multiple personality disorder. There was an instance where we were talking, you know, he said something, I said something, he said something, I said something, and all of a sudden he just switched in the middle of the conversation. Like from one sentence to the next, it was like he kind of like came to. And he had no idea what we were even talking about. And he denied the entire conversation we'd just been having. And he wasn't trying to mess with me. He really had no idea what we were talking about. And, you know, so there was this, he also had blackout periods where he just didn't remember entire chunks of things he had done. You know, even when, as roommates, all of us together, like as far as he was concerned, a lot of things never happened. He just wasn't there. So there was the blackout periods, the persona switching in mid-conversation, something my brother also witnessed of him when my brother moved in with us before we moved on to get our own place together. The hot, cold, Jekyll and Hyde. Very controlling, and just seemed to operate with an agenda to try to, in my case, it was to cut me off from all things spiritual, metaphysical, which I was involved with before I was with him. I was the person who always had the tarot cards and, you know, believed in psychic abilities, and I always had all my experiences with that. And was just in tune with that sort of thing and interested in it, researched it since I was a kid, and is something my family discussed. And then along comes him, and it's just like trying to stamp that out and get me to stop with that and just be empty, which is why after we broke up, like I talk about this in my book, his only big complaint about me that he could come up with, and it was said with such disgust and disdain, was that, and you were never really an atheist. Like he was just like, how dare you? Like you just pretended to be an atheist for me, and I can tell that you're not really. This is like this huge indiscretion on my part. Like of all the things that I guess, not that I did anything, it's not like I cheated on him or did anything, but that was his biggest complaint that he could come up with. So showing that there was almost like an agenda, that was the number one thing, was to just get me to be an atheist and, you know, be anti-spiritual at all costs. And it just infuriated him that apparently it was, the mission had failed.
I think that, you know, that basically ties into what I experienced as well, or many of us who are targeted. It's not just, you know, there's the psychic, emotional, sexual feeding, or the luge they feed off of the friction and the conflict, but also to push us off of our path, you know, to kind of, you know, destroy us or what we're meant to do or be or whoever, right? So I can definitely relate this in my experience as well, especially after the relationship. It was already over, but still the chords connected, and I was dealing with some public attacks. It just put me in a downward spiral, and all the shame and guilt came up of even like, I even had suicidal thoughts, which I never really suicidal tendencies, but just visions of like holding a gun against my head or hanging myself, and just even wanting to delete my blogs and films. It was just all part of like this whole mechanism. And, you know, I feel literally like something in my third chakra, this sense of my will, self-power, right? And, you know, which ties in again what Tom mentioned, which is really, really important, what I realized too with about intuition, right? And because looking back at my experience, I can totally relate to what Carissa says. I was rereading my blog the other day, which I had my experience, and almost like a past life. It's like, holy shit, I can't believe, like I've healed myself. I feel so good and learned my lesson. These are just also, I feel like initiations in a sense, right? To help us, if we work through it, it makes us stronger, right? But, you know, looking back, the red flags were always there. I was just not acknowledging them because I wasn't trusting myself. You know, the lack of healthy self-love. And, you know, and then I remember, Eve, you were writing in your book, Dark Side of Cupid, also about red flags, right? And why people don't listen to the red flags or their intuition. That ties into our own childhood wounding, how we've been diminished, put down in our whole society, and schooling doesn't nurture that part of ourselves, you know?
I will say that, like you said, Bernhard, that it's a learning lesson. There's always something positive to be gleaned from anything negative that happens to us, for the most part. And in this case, because I was with such a terrible guy, it taught me a lot of lessons. It made me become aware of the fact that I was attracting in things that I was familiar with. I mean, being abused, you know, by your parents physically or verbally and emotionally, it's no fun, but it becomes all you know. And it programs your subconscious. That's all you know. You don't like it, but it's all you know. And then next thing you know, you're attracting in people in your life that are just, it's the same energy. And until you become aware that that's in your field and that's happening, there's no way to break out of it. And you'll just keep attracting those people. So he made me aware that, I mean, look at him. He's the exact conglomerate of both my parents put into one person. And I attracted that in. So I had to become aware of that. And then being with such a terrible guy made me then have a basis of comparison and realize I want somebody good, which helped pave the way for why I'm with somebody like Tom, who's a good guy. There's nothing about him that's like my ex. So, you know, it's just good things did kind of come out of it in a weird way. So
sometimes we can only connect the dots looking back. Not in the midst of it, it's all fucking confusing, obviously, and like.
One thing I wondered about was, and maybe everybody can also share their perspective on this. The one thing that would disturb me was trying to figure out which one is the real identity. Is it the one that is it the nice one, or is it the bad one?
Or neither.
What do you mean real identities?
Well, because when you get a victim, let's just say the predator is a victim as well, right? Because everybody's a victim in this game, right? But when I say what is the real identity, it's like, who's the real personality? How do you know who the real personality is? I mean, when you went out with him, Carissa, and you said he was like a Jekyll and a Hyde, so he would have like, you would just become the aggressor, right?
He's just, you know, just he could have this just super pleasant and, you know, just have that persona where, you know, he looks nice, he's really well, and he's very pleasant, but only behind closed doors did I see that other side where he would just get cold and he could just say some things, and he had a lot of anger that he would like buried, like rage deep down, so he could lose it and like, you know, flip a table and come after you and chase you through the apartment. He's gonna come. That happened on. So the relationship started bordering on abusive by the end. I mean, it was getting really messed up, and that's why when I was rereading my journal, I was like, oh my God, like I felt like I was reading somebody else's life, and I'm like rooting for them to finally wake up and leave this terrible person, you know? So that Jekyll and Hyde thing, it was only behind closed doors. When he was with the rest of the world, he was as pleasant as could be, you know, and everybody thought he was the greatest guy, you know? They didn't see that he had problems. He's very, very good at hiding it. But
by the way, that's a very good point too. From the outside, people don't actually see what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a description of a narcissist, 100%. And what we can see here is that apparently becoming a narcissist or developing this kind of features in a person is very much connected to entity possession. Mm-hmm. Because I have seen, for example, I saw it in my ex as well, that he had very much unhealed issues. He had a lot of anger that he didn't resolve, but he could be very nice, very kind, very gentle, but he started changing over time, and then he started becoming aggressive, and to a point that it was almost unbearable. He was even physically violent, and that's not the way he was raised by his family. There was nobody else in the family who was like that. So I really suspected that in some way, something happened in the way. Some kind of entity maybe got as well inside of him and tried to make him change, and he really became a narcissist.
Yeah, in my ex's case, I really believe the severe drug use he did when he was a kid opened him up to demonic stuff on top of whatever military MyLab's programming I'm guessing he went through. I mean, you know, being NSA and all that. So yeah, absolutely. And it was like, it just kind of got worse and worse over time. Like you were just saying, Arella, it's like it didn't start out like that. And then it was just becoming downright abuse. Some of the things that would come out of this guy's mouth towards me, like by the end, it was just, and then I started wising up, and it got to the point where one time we were having, he would do a lot of mind games, like just really try to keep me down. And my brother saw it right away when he came to live with us, and he said, oh, he's threatened by you, you know, he knows you're smarter than him, and you know, it threatens him. But he would just start pulling his usual mind games because he's so used to me taking it. But now I was like waking up and wising up to things. I remember one time he was pulling his games, and I just said, you know, fuck you, and just walked away and left him standing there literally talking to a wall. So and just I started doing that and kind of, you know, coming out of it. So but
the fatal attraction dance of this whole interplay is something that is fascinating to me in certain points, in certain ways, because there's always a push-pull with their behaviors, and you know, where it leads into what James said about the obsessive compulsive needs, that, but also an engulfment and just like this power play, constant power play.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah, and he was an energy vampire too. I forgot to mention that. Like I would literally have my energy drained every time I was in his presence. I didn't know about energy vampirism back then. I wasn't well versed in it, but it was a phenomenon. I'd come home from work, we'd sit around and we'd be talking about our days, and literally within a half hour, it was like all my energy was getting siphoned into him, and he would go from being kind of slumped to being full of pep and energy, and I would literally go and crawl onto the bed and go take a nap. I was exhausted. Like you just feel like it's like your life force. It's not a normal type of tired. It's life force energy. And this was confirmed by our friend Mike. We had a mutual friend, Mike, who anytime they had to work on cars together, and they'd both be on, you know, those little roller boards underneath the cars, passing wrenches back and forth, you know, doing that thing. Mike said he hated working with this guy on cars, even though they're friends, because he would just be exhausted after being around him. So he was an energy vampire. Anyone he was around, he would just suck their life force. So that was another thing I forgot to mention. It was very important. It was another huge red flag. So,
and what about the dynamic where somehow everything gets twisted so that you're blamed for everything, essentially?
Oh, of course.
Even when and that's typical narcissism. So no matter, you can't win. Like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because even if they are the ones that cause an issue, or they're the ones that create the drama, which typically is the way it goes, you will be blamed.
Yeah.
Somehow or other, they're the victim.
Yeah, and they shame and blame too.
And they shame, blame, project, shame, blame, project, and then punish.
Oh yeah.
Punitive. Why don't you talk about that, Evie?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just thinking of something that happens actually with several people where they feel like they were victimized, and there's always a part of how we allow ourselves to be victimized through our own, not listening to the red flags, for example. But a lot of times, even if you confront, let's say, a narcissist or somebody who's being manipulative and overstepping their boundaries, and then you're saying, hey, you know, I think you're being manipulative, I don't really like what you did, and then they turn around and blame you and make you wrong, and then they shame you. Well, all you had to do was ask. Well, you should just said no. And then, but they're still acting on deception and acting on invasive boundaries, and justify being manipulators and controllers and abusers. And then they make you wrong if you complain about it because you didn't stand up. But then they created the situation in the first place.
I think the problem,
that's a reptilian tactic, and that's a narcissist tactic.
Or if you criticize them. If you are at all critical and you bring up a fault that they have, they just lose it.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way too. But the problem is that we don't sometimes, because we sometimes assume that others just feel and think like we do, we can rationally or with reason talk about this, right? So that's the first assumption that ties with the assumption of people have in the New Age as well, that we are all one. That means we're all the same, and you know, and like, and all that.
And that's interesting, Bernard, because and I want to hear more from Aurelia, but that's exactly interesting, because the one thing that is just maddening is that when you try and rationally explain a situation or some drama that occurred, when you try to be rational about it, you can't. It's It's like you can't communicate with them the way that you would be able to communicate with anybody else.
Yeah.
It's all...
It throws them off even more. You know what I mean? I think Carissa was talking about, it makes it even more confused. They have blackouts. They don't even remember. Like when you bring sense in the situation, it's like they're shortcutting. You know what I mean? Like it's just malfunctioning because they can't receive that.
But they can't communicate it. And that's one of the things I learned where, you know, I went to therapy and did a lot of schooling to get my degree and everything. And one of them is communication skills and learning how to communicate to do problem solving or conflict resolution or compassionate communication. But with people who don't, quote, play by the rules because they're by nature psychopaths or narcissists or they're hosted or run by something, they can't play by the rules because they never play fair. So they always twist and turn things. So it's really hard actually to communicate clearly with someone like that unless you have absolute evidence and you're doing it in front of a third party, and then they might back down because they don't ever want to be exposed for what they are and what they're doing, because there's something inside them that actually really knows. It's not always running, you know.
And I don't think they can always tap into their core emotion either. I think that's part of the symptomology of their design, is that there's so much trauma there that they have to have all these masks, and they have to protect themselves at all costs. Therefore, it's essential for them that they, you know, spin it and twist everything so that they can never get inside, because that would be, they just can't do it.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's an unbearable pain for them or something. Like they can't have that level of realization or connection with themselves, which it makes me think again of what Carissa said, that feeling that they have that they're empty.
Oh yeah.
Right?
And that's the thing, is he actually would, there's been times where he had apologized for something, so he wasn't quite like what you're just describing right now. However, when he did, it was empty. It was like he didn't really feel like he actually really cared about the damage he'd inflicted or the terrible things that come out of his mouth, or it was just more like, he's reading, he could tell I'm upset, and if he wants to be able to cohabitate in peace, he better do something just to make it right, but he doesn't care. It doesn't bother him that I had, you know, that he said something really terrible or, you know, was being raged.
And that's the distinction right there, because I think when you have a person who's genuinely tormented and tortured and fractured, let's say, and being run by something within them, if they're genuinely sorry, and if you see that they're genuinely sorry and they just can't control certain reactions that occur or certain puppeteering, then I think that's a way to see that there is a distinction between that and a real predator.
Oh yeah, he was just empty. I mean, by the end of the relationship, he'd had this new tactic where he started to talk to me all the time like I was 5 years old and really stupid, like just a really dumb 5-year-old, like a father talking to a little kid. And I was like, where is this coming from? And his eyes would just be empty while he was doing it. The same way his eyes were empty when he'd be reciting these scripts all the time. Like he's just like an empty vessel that was just filled with whatever stuff wanted to fill him with, and whether it was scripts or, you know, okay, now you got to treat her like this, or try this tactic, you know, and treat her like she's a stupid 5-year-old. And then by that point, then the relationship was over. That was the end of that. But it's just interesting to look back at that with everything I know now and see it with the new eyes, you know, where at the time I was like, what is this? Like, what is happening? So, and you know, I realize he is a victim in this. And, you know, I saw pictures of him as a little boy, and like everybody, he was a cute and innocent little boy. And I think terrible things were done to him that nobody deserves, and he was severely fractured. And I think it's like his soul just exited stage left. It couldn't handle it anymore, and he was taken over by and so, you know, he's a victim in it too.
And that's a healing, like yeah, it would be great if we could focus on healing on both sides, like not just because they're victims as well.
Yeah.
So it's there's hope for everybody. I don't believe anybody's fully ever lost. It's just how much they're willing to work.
Yeah, and they do have to be willing. I mean,
yeah,
there's so many factors. Like I know that with the severe abuse, a lot of times with the fracturing, and let's say if they're in one of those families, right, that they're already what I call their underborn rights. They're under somebody who's NSA, aerospace, military industrial complex, or Illuminati bloodline. And these kinds of groups are actually, their bloodlines are already under the born rights of many interdimensional beings that are already running them. So they have like an extra hurdle to go through, actually, is to come out from under that, as well as the abuse and just the healing from the abuse itself. They've got the extra interdimensional interference, as well as mind control programming, and all those different things are interplaying, which can make healing a really complicated process if they don't even know, quote, what the problem is. And I think that's why so many people don't heal, is because they don't even get to the higher levels of what's really running them. And so it's like the human part of you has to shine so brightly and to want so bad to heal that you can do it. But if you don't want it bad enough and you can't get through that level, it's not likely to happen, or happen. It'll take a really, really long time, many lifetimes, you know.
I think that also ties into how a lot of people, especially in this day and age, go into like spirituality, fringe topics, and new age and yada yada, but don't have like just the basic foundational knowledge and application of basic psychological self-work. You know, just basic understand shadow projection, basic childhood wounding, all the stuff, how we, you know, sometimes attract a partner that is a shadow aspect of our parent, you know, and seek love outside ourselves, and yada yada. Like these, like basic things of psychology, which are very much needed to help to turn off the food source, so to speak, right?
Absolutely. I think the new age is becoming a real problem, because I mean, I know there's a lot of healers out there who claim a lot of things, but they don't have in-depth psychotherapeutic or trauma resolution understanding. And so they'll try this method or that method and think this Reiki will work, or this, and it's like it doesn't work because they don't have the thorough understanding of even how these things work. And then they're being used by their, let's say, their spirit guides, who are actually guiding the whole thing so that they can be resources for these loose predators. Mm-hmm. So, and this is why, like what Arella said, you know, these women are looking for help, and then they fall into these twin flame forums where it's basically encouraging this wonderful connection, and then really it's like one of these dark side of Cupid things. So people don't even know what's happening, and they don't even know how to heal so that this doesn't happen. And there's just a lot of false beliefs just trapping them into being predated upon, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I see a lot of people that they prefer to go to New Age healers, and many of these people, they don't even have a degree or have not even studied psychology or have a little bit of, let's say, background or information about how to do things. They just basically do the Reiki or the other techniques, and it's just passing by entities from one person to another and from one person to another. It's like going to a hospital and getting the flu and all the virus, you know, when you go to these healers, because they really don't know what they're doing. They are giving you meditations and things to do, and let's invoke this deity, and let's call for this angel, and let's connect to this, and they're just making people become parasited instead of healing. So normally to all the ladies that contact me, I say, you have to find a good psychologist, but a clinical who won't get maybe too much in the spiritual. The spiritual, maybe you can do it yourself, because we cannot get into the belief of people and say, well, you have to believe this or you have to do this prayer. That's very personal, and they have to get to that through their own. But you have to do the psychological work in a clinical way, without people doing Reiki or telling you to connect to Kuan Yin or to whatever. Just basically clinical healing.
Thank you.
I mean, I agree. But you know what I found also is both ways, because in my own process with one of these love bite experiences in my life, with my ex-girlfriend many years ago, we went actually to psychotherapy together, which helped a lot. Gestalt therapy, basic Jungian psychology, and just tracing it back to childhood wounding. I can see how she reflected my mother on some level, and it was very insightful, very good, you know, so it really helped me on a certain level. But then I also got stuck on this level, because then I knew there was something else operating, and I tried to interpret and see everything through the psychological lens, you know, and not understanding, okay, there's other entities or something else, and then got hung up on the labeling as well, you know what I mean, like borderline personality, narcissist, which are all valid labels which we need to understand certain things. But in the end, these are, you know, people who are borderline personality, narcissists, whatever, are like we just established. In the end, these are entities working through them or being possessed by them, and we just, you know, label that as from a psychological perspective, right? But I found there's a trap as well. It's got both ways. Like Ariella said, it's very important, and I agree, have a foundational, clear, just psychological understanding, application, healing, you know, but also not be limited in that tunnel vision, you know, that's kind of like a step. And then I felt through my own healing, working with, be it holographic kinetics or this other amazing shaman woman I've been, who just came it's perfect timing again, right? In my life, helped me to work through my own embodiment process and clearing energy. So it goes, everything. It's kind of that holistic approach, right?
Yeah.
On the psychological, mental, emotional, energetic level.
Well, that's
The other thing is too, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to say something quick too, because a lot of psychologists in the regular therapies, they don't understand the, let's say, the MK Ultra programming or the ritual abuse or the high occult level programming that takes place, or, quote, alien abductions and astral abductions, and then the things that are done on these subtle levels to actually program and influence people so that they have a lot of these issues, in addition to just like regular trauma. So they're mistaking things and misdiagnosing people, actually, calling them psychotic when really they are being abducted. So I think they need to have more information about what's happening and be able to still apply good old-fashioned psychological trauma resolution and support. But knowing, okay, wait a minute, they'll be able to assess, wait, that's programming. I could tell that's programming right there. And they'll be able to identify it and know that maybe it doesn't come from the parents, it comes from something else because they were put into a MyLab program, for example. But most psychologists, they wouldn't know that. They're just not trained to recognize those things.
The key what I see also what Ariella said, especially in the spiritual community, healers and all that stuff, New Age, whatever, or even psychology, we cannot expect much because it's the mainstream. But I realize, my own healing process going to, sometimes we need help. We cannot always do the self-work on our own. Sometimes we guidance, reflection, or healing, whatever, on various levels. But I see, especially in the so-called spiritual community, and I don't know, or the New Age, and it's hard to define what the New Age is these days. So, maybe we should even make a definition, because I've been called New Age because I do body work, which is ridiculous. So, but, what I see is the lack of understanding of the hyperdimensional control mechanism and the dark side of that, agenda, and that we're not on top of the food chain. So anybody who doesn't know that will always interpret any, disease or illness or whatever they're helping a client with through their limited reality, and then become even conducts of negative entities working as positive ones, right? Which we see in the channel community and all of that kind of stuff, or even in basic tarot reading where people get to tarots or psychics, they become instruments of these negative entities when they are not aware of it. And then even putting two people together in the love bite scenario. Most people go to psychics and tarot reading for relationships questions, right? I mean, that's, I think.
Exactly. Actually, there's people who are willing to pay a lot of money every single day or every week to get a tarot reading and to know what's going on and all that, instead of paying that money maybe to go and figure out why they are so eager to get that person, right?
Right. Very good point. Yeah.
The other thing too is that I like what everyone's saying about having clinical psychological therapy in order to get to the core wounds, and combining it with the spiritual knowledge and with the knowledge of these hyper dimensions that are utilizing everyone in so many different ways so that we can recognize what's going on in our own lives. The danger, however, sometimes is when a person knows that they're possessed and they know that they have these traits and they're doing damage, that sometimes they can use that as an excuse as well. So really what it boils down to is, at the end, the more knowledge, the better, but the person just needs to have to want to do it on their own. And they really need help without excuses and justifications for their bad behaviors that are damaging. So that ultimately is huge. So,
and there are, I'd just like to add something. There are telltale markers which differentiate whether you call it the alien love bite or the dark side of Cupid, etc., from normal interpersonal relationship issues. And Eve has done a lot of work in this regard, and she's listed a number of these aspects. For example, shared dreams. And when we're operating on that energetic level where we're in the same dream pool, if you will, with another person, all of these connections are intensified. So when one begins to have shared dreams with the other person, when one begins to have shared psychic experiences, almost to the point of telepathy, where they not only can feel what the other person's feeling, other person's thinking about me, they're feeling sad, something's going on with them, I need to call them, right? There's a whole laundry list of these kinds of symptoms, symptomology, if you will. Like another very common, at least in the old days, scenario would be the two targeted individuals would find themselves either in a very real, seemingly real stage-managed dream, or in an actual environment where they seem to be in like a hotel room setup, where there's like a double wide bed, there's white bed sheets, there's the stereotypical hotel room lampshades and lamps, and they're there and they're expected, and they may get the arousal mechanism activated between the two, and they may begin acting out and having intercourse, whatever the case may be. So these are things that differentiate what we're talking about from quote unquote average normal interpersonal relationship issues. There's a supernatural, if you will, a spiritual dynamic which tends to intensify all of these feelings. And again, we're resonators of emotions, and this is all about energetic harvesting and emotional harvesting. So these archontic parasitic beings have no qualms about doing whatever it takes to rev up these emotions within us, whether it's through technology, like Tom was pointing out earlier, technology, through frequency modulation, energetic or physical implants, whatever the case may be. Our emotions can be dialed up and down on a whim. And so people have to understand that this is a dynamic that if one were strictly to look at it from a psychological standpoint, they would come up lacking. And the irony is, if we're one to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, if they misdiagnose you, then you wind up getting plugged into the psychiatric tyranny, where they load you down with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, psychotropic drugs, and that just destroys cognitive function. It opens you up to even more entity attachments and cords and everything else, because it's all tied in. So I just wanted to throw that out, that when the listeners and the viewers here is talking about these supernatural elements, that's what's going on, and all of it tends to accentuate and exacerbate all these feelings, all these emotions, all this turmoil, and it further tends to embed us energetically to that other person.
Yeah, I like how they use that term, embed energetically, because I think that's exactly what happens. There's a stronger link, and then it doesn't come undone, even when you want it to, and you still have this link to somebody else. But I think part of, like, quote, the love bite is that there's many, many factors involved to exacerbate the connection, including alien implants or some kind of energetic implants or blocks, as well as programming, as well as, quote, entities. So there's several aspects involved, which I think if we wanted to heal from these things, we have to take that into consideration, but at the same time not deny the basic psychological wounding we have had or unmet needs, and be able to take responsibility for healing on that level. Because what I'm finding is that I get a lot of people claiming, oh, I'm a targeted individual, and so they're blaming everything on being a targeted individual, and they're not taking responsibility on a lot of different levels that they could, or they may not understand, because their information is only coming from a certain forum that only talks about it in a certain way, and they're not getting the whole breadth and depth of what really happening to apply the solution.
Plus, the entities don't want them to take control.
Oh, of course not.
The entities want them to be in denial. The entities want them to justify their bad behaviors, even if they know that they're possessed. Like, oh no, well, the entity made me do it. So that it's huge level of manipulation by, puppeteering, so as to not control, to not take control. That's what they don't want.
Yeah. So maybe at this juncture, we can actually take a little bit of a break, And then when we come back, we can maybe go into more elements of how to heal from this and the therapeutic interventions we can do for this. And also a little bit about, what's a positive relationship versus what's a setup, so that we could actually be clear on that and not feel victims to all this, because really we're not. We don't have to be. So anyway, just wanted to point that out, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Is that okay? Okay. So we're back, and we want to talk about some of the elements that really, I guess, help bind people together in a stronger bond. And one of the things that we came across, especially in MILABs, but abductees too, in the pre-bonding, they do this many times throughout our life. And then it'll be under sometimes traumatic situations or many different emotional extremes or situations. And that actually serves to strengthen the bond. But not only that, is when they astrally and energetically bind you together and melding, and what do you call astral sex, or like soul unions, that happens. And that actually has a more profound effect on bonding than even physical sex. And that alone can be done, and creating that kind of a connection, so that when you do meet the person, or let's say you do have a relationship with them, when you're with them, you remember, it's like, you know their body, you remember everything. It's a body memory to know everything, how they would make love, everything. It's just like, everything. You've been with them before, but you can't place the memory. It could be like a powerful deja vu, but it's a body sensation. It's a recognition, even on that level. So, and undoing that. And I think the problem with undoing from the obsession is because the bond is so strong that you really just have to let go and make sure that you get your needs met. You take responsibility for the healing of what you need to do for other areas of your life. And that could be, working out the abduction stuff, really clearing out the programming, if there's programming there. And, James was talking about this on our break, and how we can disengage from that so that we can set boundaries. Actually, physical boundaries is helpful, to set physical boundaries. Although nowadays we have so much of the technology and the internet and texting and Facebook that in order to disengage, you really need to disengage even from those means, because even engaging on Facebook and email is a way to keep the link. So I'd say that disengaging long enough to regain your energy, and your confusion factor will start to dissipate. So you start to recognize what spell you were under, because really when you're bonded, there's this energy vampirism thing that could take place too, if the other beings responsible are feeding off of it. So that means your awareness could go by the wayside. You fall under a spell, and you may have confusion and self-doubt, and you just get so caught up in it, you lose your awareness. So you have to disengage from that person long enough to regain your composure, regain your energy and your awareness, and then start working on your stuff, basically.
And I think what you're saying, Evie, correlates, because all of these setups always go back to your original setup.
Yes, and the original wounding too.
And your original wounding. So it all takes you back to the original setup. And those are the setups that follow you until you finally unplug from it all and attach the reality of what your core issues are to your current paradigm.
Yeah.
Because it's always related. It's always related to the beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
First setup.
Yeah. And I know
that's interesting, Laura, what you said about the core wounding. I can see it in my own life, be it with love bite scenarios or other issues, or even attacks publicly I've received, whatnot, that always triggered guilt and shame within me. Just diminishing myself, always this solar plexus, third chakra, which is like the self-worth, the will, So that was always triggered, and like I was even basically what was behind it, not diminishing my own trust into myself, be it even engaging with certain groups and people when I see red flags, but not really trusting because they must know better, and and all these kind of things, or not trusting my intuitive insights when doing a love bite scenario, even while it was happening, or even just before it was happening, because not truly trusting that deeper intuitive knowing, which I also want to point out is not just not just an emotion, but it's really like a deeper embodied knowing. Like there's actually clarity in these moments, but then the programming or whatever kicks in, not trusting that, the emotional override, the sexual override, all of that, and the confusion, and then sometimes what also relates to being gaslighted, that, blaming you or questioning your own experience, right, and projecting it back onto you.
And the altered states. I mean, I had an experience where literally they induced so much melatonin in my brain in the middle of waking. Like, I have a hard time sleeping as it is. Melatonin is not in large amounts in my brain. But when they wanted to knock me out, when I was coming to realization and really suddenly I was flooded with melatonin, and I just, almost just passed out unconscious. So they can cause things like this in us. They can induce chemicals in our bodies, in our hormones, or our adrenals, you name it, and manipulate us. And then our alters step in, because a lot of this is it's all altered states that we're operating under without knowing it. So, and they can induce any chemical they want, including the, the desire to want to be injected by it when love equals pain. It's like you're in this and love equals pain. That's not logical. I mean, there's always some pain associated with love, but this is a love bite and it's pain, yet we stay in it. I mean, these are things that they're doing to our bodies and our minds and chemicals.
So the question is now, how do we protect ourselves from that? How do we because I feel like, and you guys I'm sure can relate when people first get into this topic, I see a lot of people becoming very fearful, like paranoid, like, oh my God, they have control over everything, our thoughts, emotions, what's going, I feel it's really important to understand that we are way more powerful than how they make us believe we are, right? So that we have our own sovereign power to counteract that, to protect ourselves, which my experience relates to embodiment and frequency, to anchor this, not in a new age, would talk of higher frequency in the sense of like just thinking positive thoughts and always being loving and light. But it entails actually understanding the dark side and evil, like knowledge protects as well. So there's a part of it is also gaining knowledge, educating ourselves. And, for the listeners, we can, all of us have our work published in many ways and they can learn from it. So that's part of that. Education is part of the healing as well, to understand that, but knowledge is useless if it's not applied, right? Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, absolutely, like what you're saying about that they're not all powerful. And I mean, a good example of this is the fact that me and Tom are still together in each other's lives. And the reason for that is because both of us had access to Eve's work prior to things happening. Yes, they can do a lot of things. Like Laura's talking about, they can do all these hormonal things. I mean, the whole sleepy programming thing, that's like a big one. They don't just do it when you're awakening to love bite. They do it like in general. I talk about that. I have an article called Interférences on my website, and the whole sleepy thing, that's a big one that will happen to people when they're reading important material that stuff doesn't want you to read, and you just feel like, oh, I just want to go pass out and go to sleep. It's completely fake. It's something they're putting on you. It's like an overlay. But just because they have these abilities to, manage things like a stage show, they're not all powerful. I mean, awareness and knowledge is everything. And just knowing that this stuff is happening and being strong enough with your own willpower, determination to override and question and all that sometimes is enough to get you through it. And that's what happened with us. We had the awareness that of the love bite through Eve's book, and just knowing that this could be what's happening here. That was a lot, with our own ability to push back. That's all it took. So they were trying all these shenanigans, like it's like textbook. It's like you run down the whole list of everything Evie talks about in her book. It's like they tried everything, and here we are.
You know, that's interesting on that note in terms of interference in Eve's book, because in one of my, I think I've had 2, possibly 3 love bite type relationships, or dark side of Cupid. And the second one around 2012, I was really already feeling something is off here. And then I remember, Evie, you just published your book on Richard Dolan's, right, the publishing company. And I ordered that book right when it came out. Even before it came out, I ordered it, and they were supposed to ship it to me. Right in the time I had all these weird occurrences in this relationship, but it never arrived. It didn't come. They forgot the order, even paid for it. It never came. So then I also totally forgot about it. Then I got kind of sucked into this group I was associated with and visited them and whatnot. So I just totally got it on the back burner. And then, like, in the last dark side love bite relationship, like, that's when I'm like, I need to get this book. So that's when I ordered it from Amazon and finally got it and read it. And I was already aware of it because I read your Alien Love Bite book, but I was totally associating it. Oh, these are abductees. I don't really fit the profile, so I couldn't relate. And then I was reading your book, Dark Side of Cupid. I'm like, oh my God, I was like underlining the whole book. And, I checked out all the symptoms. I'm on the top of the target group, and this all clicked. But, and I can also relate to interference of, and I see this in many people as well, what you just said, Clarissa, about reading certain material, and then you get sleepy, or distractions, like phone calls, other people distract you, and you cannot get into it. All of that.
Yeah.
And the overlay that you said is exactly what it is, too, because when these things happen, and we were talking about where is our power and our sovereignty. Well, the last huge attack that I had, which was like filled me with melatonin, I knew, but this relates also back to when they paralyzed me and whatever, and I knew it was an overlay. So as soon as you know that, and it's not actually real, it only becomes real when you believe it and you give into it. Then it really like continues. But when you realize the game and how they work, then you know how to just not believe it and you eject it. So then you just come back to normal. You just come back to yourself, your own sovereignty. But it really, really is so seductively powerful, because we base everything on what we feel. They know that. They rigged it in us. So because we feel something, therefore we believe it.
Yeah, that's a big.
Yes, it's the emotional addiction component. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying that the whole lack of self-awareness and self-correction, that's one of the big underlying problems that allows these things to occur, right? Because it's not always that they are omnipotent, and able to override everything. It's just that we are so weak because we're not actually utilizing our free will and applying it. Because if you're not aware of something, I mean, take the strongest man on earth. If he's not aware of something, of a mouse, right, he's not gonna be able to do anything about it, right? So it's that whole like sleeping giant syndrome that we have, and once you become aware of something, at that point there's only energy and willpower that still stand in your way, and that's one of the reasons why they do try to zap your energy. And there's many methods that they can use for doing that. Because if your sleep deprivation is one, another is having someone in your life, or just having entities around you set up in your apartment, at the etheric level. They can actually plug into your etheric body and start siphoning off energy. So that can also cause a person to get gradually weaker and sicker and more tired over time. Then that's a typical infestation type situation. So once you become aware of it, ignorance, lack of energy, and lack of willpower. Those are, my book, those are one of the only 3 things that keep people trapped. And if they can get over those 3 things, then they can buck pretty much almost anything.
Yeah, the willpower is like really important. In fact, that's one of the things that actually connects you with your highest power is the will. And if you just want to do it, and if you just want to heal, and if you just want to be able to be willing to know that, okay, maybe I have some blind spots, and it's kind of like a humility and a willpower that connects you with the spirit, your higher power, to actually take charge and start showing us what the truth is. And so, but the energy thing is definitely important. I think that's why we need to disengage and set boundaries from, let's say, the love bite person or somebody who's trying to distract you. So you could have at least some peace and some solitude, enough to rebuild your energy and awareness so that you could start really connecting more with that spiritual component. And that's really important. It's the willpower and the ability to be humble. And what I find is that a lot of people who aren't doing their work because they're not getting humble enough to be willing to say, hey, maybe I have some blind spots, but they're wanting to blame, or they're just not dealing with their stuff because they're so run by, programming or fear or whatever it is. So really willpower is so important, and it's all you really need.
It's interesting that about willpower, because you mentioned your book, Dark Side of Q, which I've experienced as well, which I said before, that they target the solar plexus, the third chakra, which is the sense of will, your own willpower, basically, which they try to sap to diminish you, you're not sure anymore, and with boundaries. So it's so true, because in my experience, the hardest lesson in my life has been actually to say no without feeling guilty or shame, oh my God, I say no, saying no without explanation, having that boundary, getting over that new age programming of just always make nice and be nice and work things out, and sometimes no, and using anger, because anger, which also has been demonized as negative in the new age, using it, because when you experience anger, it's actually your body is experiencing a violation of a boundary.
Yeah, exactly.
That as an energy to set your boundary, to kind of back the fuck off. This is
exactly. Actually, that's something that happened to me when I finally decided to heal from all this. That in my dreams I was able to wake up in the dream. That's something that I was reading on Evie's blog. That it's a technique and it's very useful, but it happened spontaneously. I was not actually learning how to do that. But I remember I started saying, no, well, this has to stop. I have to heal. I have to empower myself. I have to stop being fearful of these entities. And when I was going to bed in the night, I was very scared of the dreams, and I had nightmares and all that. And finally, I was able to wake in the dream. And I was even able to confront them, because they were always staging these kind of scenarios where, for example, I hate to see, for example, children suffer, and they would put scenes of dead children and things like that to really scare me off, or try to recreate fights with people from my family. And then one night, I remember that I was like, stop. You have to think that this is a dream. They're staging you. They're here. They're staging the dream. And then I started confronting all the people who was in the dream. And I said, where is the handler? Where is the person handling this dream? Until I finally found the person, they kind of changed. And I saw that they looked like a gray alien. And I said, well, now you have to stop. I'm not going to fall for this anymore. And you cannot meddle in my dreams anymore. And they were like, oh, okay. And basically after that, my nightmares stopped.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
It's funny you had that experience, because I remember I was doing lucid dreaming practice for a while, and then would, do experiments on, asking the dream characters which ones were actually projections of me. And I was able to tell which ones were projections of me, but then there was always a watcher somewhere. And then I knew the watcher that was like the trickster was actually another being. It was like the stage manager, So, and facing the fears is good too, if you can do it in a lucid dream, but it's hard to get lucid, but that's one way to do it.
Another thing that kind of relates to what we're talking about is with the awareness and the willpower, just something really quick, and it kind of ties into this mentioned earlier about how do you tell a real relationship from what's going on with love bite, is when me and Tom were first coming together. We had a lot of interference in a lot of ways, but one of the things that would happen, which is one of the checklist traits of a love bite situation, is that we would feel energetically drained in each other's presences. So he would walk through my front door, because I had my own apartment, he had his own apartment across town. As soon as he would walk through that door, I would just feel sleepy and just drained. And it was happening to him too. We didn't know because we weren't talking to each other about this. But that's one of those things, and it creates paranoia, especially when you have awareness of the love bite. Now we're like getting paranoid about each other, like, oh, this could be, he's bad news. I feel drained when I'm in his presence. But guess what? He was feeling drained in my presence too. And then there was one night where we were, he was going to come over, we were going to hang out. And it was like I shut off. And I decided I don't want to hang out with him and I couldn't even tell you why. There was no logical explanation for it. I just felt like I don't want to hang out with him. So I canceled. No, I have things I got to do, blah, blah, blah. And then, so the next night we were going to hang out, and I was going to do that again. I just felt like I don't want to hang out with him. I'd rather just sit here and read my book and not be with him for no reason. He'd done nothing, but it was like I was shutting off. But I realized too, this is a love bite, you know, one of those major indicators. So I overrode that urge to just cut him out and like, no, we're going to hang out. So he came over, and I did what most people aren't willing to do in a relationship, which is I put this out on the table. Like, let's talk about this. Like, let me tell you what I've been experiencing, you know, the energy drain. And then I felt like I don't want anything to do with you, and I just want to cut it off. And then he revealed that it's all been going on with him too. Like, he got an urge to get back in his car and just drive back to Iowa and leave. But he was overriding it and not just acting on it. So we both were going through this. And as soon as we started talking about it and putting it out and then putting the light on it, it evaporated. So my feeling like I didn't want to be around him, it was gone. Like I was back to normal again, which is how I can tell that we do have a true connection. It's in our situation, I think we're two people who were supposed to be together, and there's indicators of that I haven't gotten into. Like on a higher level, there was indicators that we're here with like a plan, things we're supposed to do together, and the negative forces kind of tried to sabotage that, and then became, meddling in the relationship, creating artificial love bite interference, just trying to distract and break us up. But as soon as we put it on the table and became aware, it would go away, and revealing the true nature of the relationship, which is that, there is a true connection there.
Yeah, it happened to me too as well. Actually, I would like to share that because it happened with my current partner and I. Before that, I had the love bite experience with the black magician. And I had those dreams where they told me that he was my twin flame and I had to be with him and we were going to do a mission and, well, the works. And basically, it never happened. My intuition told me to get out from that, and it was very ups and downs and all that. And then I found my partner, and it has been the contrary. I started having dreams where they were telling me, he's going to do this to you, he's going to hurt you. And then in the dreams, I would see him, but he was acting like a psychopath. He was hurting other women and beating children. It was so extreme that I said, well, maybe people get confused because they say, I have the dream where he's acting like that. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe they are telling me to get out from the relationship. And just like Carissa, I always felt like, maybe I should not continue with this relationship. I should break it up. But I had no reason because he was not acting mean to me. He was not attacking me or anything. So I think there's some kind of reverse love bite here also. They're trying to disrupt true love. And also what I see with friends and ladies in the twin flame group is that they try to stage the love bite first before the true, let's say, soulmate or the true connection comes in. So what happens is that I have friends who said, well, I'm so much in love with this person and that person is completely narcissistic and it's not a good person with them and all that. And then they part ways and she finally finds a good person who treats her nicely, who really wants to help her, and he's spiritual as well. And she says, no, because my twin flame.
Everybody there?
Hello?
Did her audio cut out? Because it was cutting out just at the end. Did it?
Yeah.
Ariel, are you there?
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
You just muted yourself. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so I think that that is happening. They are trying to stage people who are not really connections before the true one shows up. That's something very common I see also in the ladies in the group, and they really get stuck. And then the other guy comes in and he's really nice and he's treating them well, but they're stuck.
So since we're on the topic of twin flames, I'd like to get into that, but kind of backtrack a little bit because it ties into like more a deeper issue, which we mentioned before. And like Tom noticed it as well, that the underlying, a reason why we fall into these traps, so to speak, is because we don't trust our intuition on some level, right? Our inner knowing, the red flags, which, call it spade, nature, whatever, spirit is always talking to us and give us guidance and in forms of symbolism or intuitive impressions, bodily sensations that, if we're truly embodied, it's always there. So if we don't trust ourselves, then we get, I see, speaking of my own experiences, if for the reason I didn't trust myself, didn't listen to my intuition, I got myself in this relationship. So I take responsibility for that, until I get the message. How often you have to pick up the phone until you get the message, right? But I see the same now, in terms of, especially in this day and age, there's with the internet, so much information. People are like out of body, in their mental body, like getting information from the internet, just chatting, being on forums. That's all this mental energy, constantly looking for information or outside themselves, not having their own sovereign authority within themselves. Right, and we know, this information age, people can learn a lot. It's necessary. It's great to connect with people, but there's a whole dark side. There's a lot of disinformation, the new age, people hooking up on the internet. And then with the twin flame, what I see, I'm not as much involved as you, Arella, in the community, but based on my experiences and having worked with people one-on-one, like there's a lot of, I guess mostly women, but also men as well, who then use the whole twin flame idea as this extreme romantic projection of the perfect partner. And it becomes a complete distortion, and it's just like anything else of looking, for that white knight, who's going to save the day, so to speak. And what I found, it actually ties similar into another topic, which maybe some of us can relate to, about higher density beings incarnated in this day and age with a certain mission profile. Barbara Messiniak's work, the family of light, or the wanderers, and star seeds. And there's maybe some truth to it, right? We can maybe relate to the profile, but I also see a lot of people is this identification with that label, oh, I'm this, I'm that, and now I'm, special, or just then distorted, or the identification with the twin flame. They get so fixated on the image of the twin flame, I'm like Carissa mentioned it, I think, in our introductory talk last week, and with Laura, I don't like even the word twin flame anymore. It's just if there's a genuine, deeper connection, soulmate, however you may want to call it, it will happen and reveal itself in the own time, as long as we stay true to our path, do the self work, gain knowledge, like in the example with Tom and Carissa, it happened without the need of this twin flame box attachment, so to speak, right? So I mean, that's just my own personal opinion. I'd rather have people get away from any of these labels and identification, and just work on the very basic level and working on themselves, gaining knowledge, working their path, learning to trust themselves, their own intuition and their own inner knowing, and that will then bring people together who are meant to be together anyway.
Exactly, Bernard. That's very important what you're saying, that it became a label. Actually, I'll speak it to you basically definition, because all this twin flame came from Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She used to be a guru and a cult teacher. She had a cult with her husband, and she was also promoting the I am presence. I'm not sure if you have heard about that. Well, the I am presence is basically the higher self. And it was one of the first ones to hijack the soulmate concept, and it made it more complex. Basically what she says, I'm going to read from her website, it says, the twin flame, or perfect love, is born out of the original white fire ovoid. This is an ovoid of light in which you are created in the central sun, the highest concentration of pure spirit in the universe. God takes the ovoid and he makes out 2 spheres of light, and each sphere looks like the causal body in the upper portion of the chart of your real self. We descend into the lower octaves, we separate from our twin flame. We lost that physical manifestation of the divine counterpart in heaven, and then we began creating obligations with other partners. And this is why embodiment after embodiment, we're married to different people. Some may be soulmates, some karmic relationships, and hopefully we will be able to do the best and share a love that will achieve a particular purpose and also balance karma. And the goal is to balance that karma, become purified on the path of the Holy Spirit, attain reunion with God and the twin flame, and climb back up the ladder of life to the source, when you see that Elizabeth is clearly making the distinction between twin flames and soulmates, living soulmates as something that is in between partners and until you find the twin flame, and that the twin flame is the highest award you can ever expect. And this is what makes women, and also some men, to cling so much to this concept of the twin flame as, you know, the perfect love and not being able to be with anyone else. And basically, when she printed her book, she was offering teachings on how to connect to the higher self and to the twin flame. And which the first step is doing some kind of meditations. And I think it works by granting permission to be interfered when you do these meditations, because the entities also, I think they also need to respect in some way free will. And if a person does a meditation, maybe that means that they want to get in touch with these entities. So of course it's a deception, and they pose as the higher self or they pose as a twin flame. But basically there has to be some kind of new age activity that triggers your consentment to be interfered.
Well, that maybe ties in what maybe Tom, you can talk about it. You, Clarissa, mentioned that before about false reality creation.
Oh.
People try to manifest. I mean, I see this a lot happening. People trying to manifest the perfect partner.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big issue because we all know that our minds are pretty powerful. You know, I've had experiences in my own life where I had to watch my beliefs and had to watch my emotions because they would actually attract in corresponding experiences in really improbable synchronistic ways. Now, you know, if you're trying to manifest something pretty innocuous like a parking spot, you know, that's not a big deal. But once you start trying to apply that towards an actual partner that you're going to be with for years, you know, if not the rest of your life, that's a really big deal. And I think the problem that happens is if you want something at a time when it's not going to be good for you, like it's not in your best interest. So like what if part of your pre-incarnational plan, if there is one, is that for the next 5 years you're going to be focusing on these different projects and self-growth things, right? But you get kind of selfish and kind of lonely and you want one right now. You want to have a boyfriend or girlfriend right now, and you want it to be like this or like that, and you pull it in so hard that you actually deviate off your optimal path. Okay. And now the thing is, like, you know, different people have this ability to different degrees depending on how much energy they have or other variables that I'm not even aware of. But I think it's possible to pull in something that is so not allowed or that is not so part of the main timeline, I guess you could say. It's almost like you're pulling in this distant strand of the timeline and weaving it into the main timeline. And this thing that you're pulling in isn't even 100% real reality, because it's not even something that was originally supposed to be. So it's almost this cut and paste kind of thing that doesn't quite merge, doesn't quite match with what's supposed to be. So it's a somewhat irreality that you're manifesting. Now the question is, what is the energy that's inhabiting this irreal thing that you pulled in? You know, if you're going to manifest someone, where did their soul come from? What was their soul doing before you manifested it to that degree? And then the question is, what if there isn't much of one, or what if there is only a little bit? Now, in the actual examples that I've looked at, people have written me, you know, some examples that we've seen, and it doesn't have to be like partners. It can be certain friends or just people that you pull in. In the worst cases, what happens is that person is almost like a placeholder, is like an empty vessel in a way. And not only are they animated by your energies, because you're the one who pulled them in, but there's also an empty spot in there where something else seems to fill it. It's almost like they're a finger puppet, and you got your finger there, and something else has got its finger in there, and so they mirror you in extremely strange ways. It's almost like they're a product. It's almost like you're having a dream, and they're a dream character, and some aspects of them mirror your own subconscious, because that's part of the energy that you projected out into this quantum reality that caused them to manifest in the first place. But there's always something strange about them in that they're not just you, there's something else too. And these characters, I don't even have a name for them because this whole phenomenon isn't really being discussed too much, but whatever they are, they tend to be very prominent vessels for dark forces to work through to get at you. And part of the reason for that is because, as Aurelia said, there's a permission aspect. You know, you signed your name on the ledger of reality saying you wanted this to happen. And even if your higher self and even if your intuition said, oh, that's not a good idea, you did it anyway. And so it's almost like giving away your free will. And so now these other entities that are kind of like lurking around the edges of the whole metaphysical protection bubble, these entities are looking around and say, okay, well, he signed his name there. He created this empty, this vessel, basically rolling out the red carpet for them to kind of come marching through. And so, the whole permission thing, that's another reason why these characters, I guess, why they can do what they do. So yeah, the whole reality creation thing, it can have positive effects. Like in the case of Carissa and I, this is you want to mention that, or maybe?
What?
Well, the idea how we kind of manifest.
Oh yeah, see, because apparently in late 2001, I had a moment where I was just kind of laying around and I was thinking, oh yeah, I'd like to have a boyfriend. It's kind of the same thing I did before, but this time not so, and there's no candle involved. I wasn't like, oh, it was just thinking this, like, oh yeah, I'd like to have a boyfriend.
It was like an earnest, kind of innocent kind of thought?
Yeah, it was like true reality creation, the way actual true reality creation operates, where I had a thought about what I'd like. I was very specific, kind of had my criteria I was kind of looking for. There was a little bit of an emotional tint to give it some, like, to nudge it, but without that obsessive, intense thing where you're trying to pound a square peg into a round hole. And then I just put it out of my head. I didn't think about it after that. So it was true reality creation as it usually works for me. I can't speak for everybody else, but anytime I've manifested things in life that have been positive, that's the way it was done. It's almost like a recipe for how you do it. So I did that. It was late 2001. It was September 2001. And it turns out the same week that I did that and had this whole thought, Tom did too. And it may have even been on the same day. That's what's really weird about it. It was like literally the same week. And you had your thought, right?
Yeah. Basically, I was just thinking about it in a pretty innocent way. I wasn't trying to do anything ritualistic or trying to make it happen out of desperation or anything. I just had this kind of, this stray thought thinking about, it'd be nice to be someone that was in my peer group who I was perfectly compatible with. That was the exact thing that I intended for. And looking back on it now.
Oh, and within a week, that's when we crossed paths. Yeah. So it took like a week. And then that's when we crossed paths. So. Yeah, now in this case, I think it was a case of two individuals who, in my case, we might have probably had some sort of a past life connection. Which I've had indications of, so. Yeah. So in between life stuff, where we might have had planned to possibly cross paths in this life. But the thing is, I think once you're incarnated here into this realm bubble, sometimes it might help to nudge probability from within it. Yeah. Or let's say that there's some interference happening, trying to keep two souls apart. And in our case, we did just enough of the reality creation to kind of make the penny drop to make sure that it did happen here, that our paths did cross. So it's interesting because in this case, it worked out for the positive. Whereas in other cases, if your intentions are impure, if you're really obsessive about it, if you could resort to almost black magic level things, and you go against your destiny and your intuition and all that, then that's when things go horribly wrong. Now in our case, there was no intuitive warning. It was more like an expression of our very hearts, like that is what we're supposed to be doing. And I was asking for what was already basically predestined in a way.
That always just came to me. It seemed to be like in the perfect moment, time in your lives, both at the same level of like just whatever you've gone through, and then you maybe almost like what you try to manifest. It was also maybe just a mirror of like, oh, this has just happened naturally. You're tapping into that, path of the higher self, what it hasn't had in store for you. That's why maybe the synchronistic. And then it all kind of just came together in a natural way. It was like even after we met each other, I wasn't. I don't know, it just going with the flow of things, not trying to make it work, and all that. And the other thing is like with my ex, the one who I manifested through negative reality creation, that car accident that happened the very next day after doing my little intention, I had what do you call it? An intervention, almost like some kind of a higher voice thing. Like when I was about to get in my car, it urged me to go back inside. I was leaving work. Okay, why don't you just go back inside and, talk to Edwin, who is my boss. Just hang out with him for like 5 minutes. He's like my buddy. So I was like, go back inside and why don't you just go, just for 5 minutes, just go talk to Edwin. And I stopped and I'm like pondering on this, but I'm like, why would I do that? That doesn't make any sense, Yeah. And so then I overrode this
thing that was trying to urge me to go back inside. Got in my car, and 5 minutes down, not even 5 minutes, it's just a couple minutes down the road, my car was totaled in an accident. And that put me on the course to be on that timeline that led to Steve. So it was like something was trying to, no, we don't want you on that timeline. And I didn't listen to it, you know? So that's a great example of, that obviously was a negative thing. Nothing like that happened with me and him.
Yeah.
So,
but you know, that's a good example of like, if this force could come in and you know, try to petition you to not go, why couldn't it just prevent your car accident in the first place, right? You know, well, why didn't it manipulate someone else to not be in the pathway to create the accident? And of course, that gets back to the whole metaphysical law, permission, you know, just the way things learn or operate in such a way to preserve your learning to some degree. I mean, there's that component to things. So free will, permission, you know, destiny, you know, all this kind of stuff. These are all the hyperdimensional variables that figure into what's going on here sometimes. Yeah, and I've just seen in other instances that don't relate to the love bite, where these forces that do try to intervene and help you out, they can only do so much in certain situations. Other ones I've seen where they can just flat out undo a no-no. Like that's just a complete flagrant free will violation of epic proportions. We can't let that happen, sorry. And they really can just, and I have an instance I've written about on my website, but in other cases it seems all they can do is just try to like convince you, you know, and that's all they can do. And I guess it has to do with free will and laws or how things operate or what they can and cannot get away with. So. Yeah, because in one case, like a major car accident that's not supposed to happen, but some negative force is trying to make it happen. It's not like well, I'm talking about like a major one, like that could actually kill you and completely derail your. And that's where one of them I saw it was just completely undone. I mean, it was just reality. Like the laws of physics were literally bent to move the car over out of the way. Oh yeah, well, actually it's happened twice then. There's been 2 times now, where so, but that's a whole other thing. But just to explain that they have certain things that they're allowed to do, and obviously there's limitations, and in this case they were allowed to try to keep me off that timeline, but you know, in the end I had my own free will, and I just was like a freight train on a determined set of tracks, and nothing was going to stop me. So but yeah, we didn't have any of that interference in us coming together. But then after we got together and he actually, you know, I moved to Florida and he came to be with me, that's when all the love bite, like most of it just kicked in full force. You mean the anti-love bite or the? Well, yeah, I mean, whatever that was, I was trying to drive us apart, like all the things that they were doing, which is all the textbook stuff that Evie has written about.
You know, that, you know, your story, you know, kind of, you know, reminds me of like the difference between a love bite obsession and a true soulmate, whatever, like true soul connection. It seems when you're truly connected with somebody, it's not this obsessive emotional love, kind of like, well, you know, Hollywood times 10, you know, romantic projection, but it's more like a sobering, you know what I mean? I'm sure there are emotions, but like you said, it was just like, oh, you know, I'm going to check this guy out, I'm going to hang out, we're going to hang out, and it's fine and good, but it's not like this obsessive compulsory component behind it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back, like it's been a long time. It's been 14 years. But yeah, I guess some of the weird stuff was kicking in before we actually, before we met up in Florida. And there was almost like, I guess, an obsessive component in some ways, but. Yeah, but overall, there wasn't something that diminished my lucidity a lot. And we truly had a bond. I mean, we would have these hours-long phone conversations where we're talking about all the woo-woo subjects and just brainstorming things and bouncing ideas off each other, like a true connection. And, you know, like we're really actually connected on a soul level and intellectually, and like a true friendship that, you know, was able to...
Yeah, that you're saying is true. It's more like a friendship. I mean, it's of course, it's romantic and all that, but it's more like a friendship. And I see that also with people who are staged, that sometimes the person they are staged with are completely in another, let's say, awakening level. They are not really very awakened, or they are in completely different beliefs. Like you said that your ex was atheist. And so that's also something that is important, because I think true soulmates, let's say, or a true connection, they have to be in some kind of same vibrational level.
Yeah, we were. It was like it just clicked, and, you know, hours on the phone until my cell phone battery would die. And it was like, you know, just into the same stuff, and, you know, really like on the same level, you know, of, our intellect.
Yeah, it totally wasn't that whole thing about like, I don't even know you, but I have this weird compulsion to,
Yeah.
you know, as we've seen in some of these cases.
Yeah. Or like in my case with my ex, feeling hypnotically, this weird hypnotic thing to be with someone that I'm not really wanting to be with. And then, you know, then when we are like intimate, I feel dissociated, you know what I mean? Which I didn't mention that before because I didn't really want to get into it, but just being just dissociated, there's just a lack of a real connection happening, and it's completely obviously being force-fitted. So
yeah, what you said, Arella, is actually very important, the complete difference of states of being, of levels, you know, that is overridden by the more romantic projection. But then you find out in the love bite that's like, oh my God, this is like completely not compatible. There's no foundation. You know, I think on that level where we are, like on that level of awareness and awakeness, you know, relationship take on a whole different meaning anyways than for quote unquote normal people, whatever, in the matrix, right? So there needs to be a really, which probably you guys experienced, a level of like unspoken understanding, you know what I mean? I mean, there can be differences, but where you're just really like on the same page about the deeper aspects of the world and reality.
Yeah.
Well, I like what Carissa said about how things just flowed, and when she followed her own, more like a spontaneous spirit nudging, and really knowing what that feels like, and it's more subtle, and it's more. That's how to know you're actually connecting with that part of yourself, and then knowing the difference between the other compulsions that aren't quite right. But sometimes that's what it takes is having it work for you, and then looking back and realizing, oh, well, that was what was natural and spontaneous to my spirit. And that's when I was really in the flow with my destiny, with somebody I really is supposed to meet. So it's really nice to have that and then compare it in your life so you can know. Because I think there's a lot of people who don't quite know. They're still confused about, you know, whether or not they're following with their spirit, or they're following with spirit guide or something. And just to be clear on that. And I think that when I look back on my life, it's something that's always more natural and spontaneous. And you feel more comfortable and at ease with that. Or if you're with somebody, you feel more at ease with them. You don't have those anxiety and the compulsions and the obsessions. You just feel this ease of naturalness and connection, where the spontaneity of your spirit could just be there because you can be who you are with them. And that's a good sign of something healthy.
Exactly, and that is true that well, in my case, it happens that you can also get too paranoid or too scared. In my case, I was very scared because well, when I was married, my ex-husband, well, he was abusive, and he was showing traits of being narcissist. And then I had the love bite with the black magician. So I was very much like, I don't want to have a relationship ever in my life. I want to just stay single for the rest of my life. And then I found my partner. So I was very much, I know that I was projecting a lot of my fears. So I was trying to find sometimes the smallest thing to say, oh, it's a love bite. It's a love bite. I knew it, and he has to go. And sometimes it was just a stupid thing, you know, that maybe that day he didn't call me at the time he was supposed to call me, and I was already saying, no, this is not going to work. So that's something that also happens with victims of the love bite. They get very scared of trying again, and they start thinking that everything and everyone is possessed, or so it's difficult.
You know, Arella, that's a very important point. I see, you know, with people becoming more aware of this topic and actually accepting and speaking out, you know, I see it, you know, in my work, and we see it on, you know, on Facebook. A lot of people are finally speaking out about this and sharing their experiences. But there is this paranoia at the same time. And I feel sometimes people project actually, first of all, don't really understand the alien love by the dark side of Cupid topic. They're just bits and pieces, haven't really done the research, and then use it in a way to blame their partner, you know, and then project this love bite scenario, dark side of Cupid scenario, into relationship patterns, which are actually just normal relationship patterns and don't have the deeper symptoms of the love bite, right? And then again, like Ariel said, I also, you know, work with people here and then. Communicate with some people, and there are some individuals out there, people, women or men, who are so paranoid, so caught up in the actual intellectual, you know, timeline projection of fear of what may happen in the future, because fear is always related to time, right? You know, so they avoid any form of relationship. You know, they've been single for 4 or 5 years, don't want to get, you know, celibate and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. On some level, we all need to feel, you know, be comfortable with ourselves first, right? I mean, there are two kinds of people. Sometimes people jump from relationship to relationship. They cannot be on their own. But sometimes people avoid it completely because a relationship brings up too much. And sometimes we just need to engage in a relationship just to deal with our basic stuff, which only comes up in relation to others. And not every relationship is right away a love bite. So while on the positive side with the increasing awareness of this topic, I see also the paranoia misapplication of this topic at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. That happens.
Aurelia, can you explain a little bit about the difference between your experience with your love bite, like your first, the one that you would say is the worst love bite, versus the real thing that you have now? Like, what are the you know, the markers that are the indicators that make it distinguishable to everyone?
Well, actually, they are very similar to Tom and Carissa's. Very, very similar, because the first one, it felt more like stage, because I had all these psychic things, you know. I had a lot of synchronicities with the name of the person, a lot of repeated numbers, a lot of dreams saying, yes, you guys, you have to be together, you have a mission. All the intense feelings. But there was still a background where this person, the things that he was doing, I was like, no, I cannot get into that, because he was actually, he was selling some kind of dark magic techniques in order to manifest things, but they were basically pushing black magic on people. So they were like saying, oh, do you want to influence someone? Then you have to look at that person and address the energy in this way and brainwash that person, and then you have to burn a candle. And, well, it was magic. And I was like, no, this doesn't go with my values. This is really not who I am. And they were pushing a lot. Yeah, that's a mission, and you have to work together, and you have to open a center to push New Age kind of teachings. And it didn't feel right. And it came to a point where I said, well, I really cannot go against my values. And I spoke to this person, to this guy, and he got really upset because I started saying, well, what you're doing is black magic. You're harming people. You're making money out of it. So I cannot be part of that. And he got really, really, really upset. He started blaming me. He started calling me, oh, but you're a nun. You don't want to do anything wrong, and you're never going to make money like that. And well, he got very upset, and he basically disappeared. But it was until I really set my foot down saying, no, this is against my values, and I'm not going to do it. And in the contrary, when I met my partner, well, we did have synchronicities. We did feel the energy. We're very compatible. We have the same astrological sign, which we were always kidding about that. We had a similar way of upbringing. We were both very lonely when we were kids. We shared many things, and also, like Carissa said, it was hours talking on the phone. We finished each other sentences. We want to do something to help people to spread this kind of information, because we have many friends who continue under the programs of the New Age, and they're suffering. I have many friends who are really suffering because of this, destroyed marriages and all that, and it really hurt us. And we have very similar values, so that's something that to me it was a big sign. But at the same time, it was very difficult because I was carrying all my bag, of wounds and trauma from the other two relationships to this one, and it was difficult for me to not think that maybe I was being tricked again. But it's a very fine line, but you can tell.
And there weren't any conflicting behaviors.
Yeah, addictive? No, not really. It was more addictive with the other one, with the black magician.
Or conflicting behaviors, like
yes,
Jekyll and Hyde conflicting behaviors. There was nothing like that with your
no. Yeah. No, there were the normal relationship things and things that we had to work. And also, well, he was very much interfered by entities. He was very much into the New Age as well. He was programmed in many things. He had different experience than I had. He told me that he had 2 experiences with ayahuasca, and in one of them he feels like he got entity possessed, definitely. Because he was, when he took it, he was moving weird, and he started doing mudras with his hands, and after that he started getting kundalini triggers, and he started really changing his way of thinking, his values, and he says that he thinks that he was being programmed, so when I would come along, he would reject me, because I had some kind of values and things that I would not do, and he used to be like that, and then he started changing after the ayahuasca experience.
Okay.
Also, I was going to add that I was thinking, and I never really thought about it until right now, but the idea that psychic connection with somebody, the synchronicity, I think on some level it doesn't always indicate a love bite. Like we did actually have we had some woo going on, and it's a matter of untangling what was the artificial overlay and manipulation and interference and what was a natural connection, because I really do believe that if you're infused with a higher spirit, you're sold, for lack of a better way of putting it, you should be able to psychically connect with the person. And the thing about my ex that I wrote about on one of my things was on my website was that he would always be able to read my mind. I could never pick up on him at any point. And the thing about me that defines me is I do have psychic inclinations, and I could never pick up on him ever at any point, but he would definitely read my mind. And, but when you try to point it out to him that he's reading my mind, he kind of freeze up because he's such a hardcore atheist, and that's like a slippery slope. You can't acknowledge anything that's woo-woo with an atheist, because it's a slippery slope to having to acknowledge things that maybe prove that their atheism is wrong. But we did have psychic stuff and some woo-woo, but I actually think it's good. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong in that, but I feel like we would be psychically in tune with each other. And it's like, the whole finishing each other's sentences thing. We couldn't even tell who thought the thought first. It was almost like our brain is linked up, and that would just happen to such an extent as we're just such in the same frequency. And I don't think that's a bad thing, and it doesn't necessarily indicate sinister things. I think, in my case, I think that's actually a good sign.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
I agree that you can have a good connection and actually really tune into each other with a positive thing and have it not be interference at all. And I wanted to make that point in my book, The Dark Side of Cupid, that even if they do have the magical, supernatural, and telepathic, empathic thing, that alone doesn't necessarily indicate it's bad, because you can have a good connection where you actually have that. And that's positive, I think. That can happen.
I have even great synchronicities and psychic connections just with regular friends on that level. You know what I mean? I think it's definitely not to be thrown out the baby with the bathwater. But the way I take it actually from your work, Evie, it's, I think, actually a combination of all the symptoms and not just taking one. People then pick, it's synchronicities, psychic, bonding, whatever, there must be love. But no, it's a whole array that all need to fit together, right? With the compulsion, the emotional obsession, and all of that, right?
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, I think that the synchronicities is can happen both ways as well, because I also was seeing repeated numbers with both relationships. And also before awakening, then when I was awakening, and then when I deprogram, I continue seeing repeated numbers. So I think it can go both ways.
Yeah. I get the numbers too. And with me, it's been interesting trying to distinguish between what are genuine synchronicities and what are the artificial ones. And what it boils down to me is that these entities, the negative ones that are doing this, they're trying to simulate the positive, but they can only simulate. They can't actually achieve it. So when they do it, it's kind of hasty. It beats you over the head, because they have to compensate for you having your intuition, right? So that they have to take you to a higher level, and therefore it comes out kind of disjointed, kind of artificial, trying too hard. It's like when you get an email from a friend, right? How do you know the difference between that and some guy in Nigeria wanting to give you money? How do you know, right? Well, your friend's going to lend you $5, but this guy's going to give you 12 million. Who's going to be better? Well, you got to be smart about that, obviously. So, when you have these artificial staged relations, all the weirdness surrounding it, it's all the things that entities can do, but they can't do other things, like the whole spiritual connection, feeling at ease with someone, like in a lucid way, not like you're drugged up with morphine and you're, oh, I feel great around this person. Well, it's not like that. It's like, wow, I'm really clear. I feel alive, feel like more of myself. You're not being squished down, you're actually being elevated. Mm-hmm. So, that's another sign or another difference between the authentic and the artificial.
Very good point. That was a good one.
Paranoia thing, that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, it just takes healing, the healing part is what really needs to happen so that we can fall into the spirit connection and feeling that sense of inner peace as opposed to numbness or avoidance. And when we can be in that place, then I think things are more natural to happen. But I think when people have the fears and the anxieties and the compulsions, it's because they haven't healed those traumas yet. But there's something that I think Bernard said that a lot of times relationships sometimes is the only way that we could really heal some of this, that we can't do it all in isolation, that we actually do need to interconnect and have relationships with other in order to heal even from other relationship issues. And that's something that I learned when I got my training, is that, we have to heal through relationship if we were hurt by relationship. We can't do everything in isolation. So I'm not the one to think that you should meditate for years and be in isolation and then you'll finally be good enough to, be able to face the world. We just have to interact with each other regularly enough to know what feels right.
And I also feel everyone, not everyone, but most people on some level, yearn for a relationship, for the perfect partner. Love, right? It's natural wanting to connect and to be with somebody on some level, right? It's normal, but it's through our own, let alone any love bite and all this stuff, but cultural conditioning through Hollywood, and all. Leading us away from our own inner knowing and feeling lack, always seeking something or somebody ourselves to fulfill our wholeness, so to speak. People don't get, I don't take myself into the equation. We may get into desperate situations and hook up with the wrong people and whatnot, but sometimes, that topic came up before. I think Tom talked about this, and Carissa, when we talked about a reality manifestation. Who knows what our, the higher self has really planned for us. That's what in my work, what I've learned the most, working over the 10 years with thousands of people on body work and also just personal processing, is like everybody's so different in an individual, right? With their own unique soul lessons and karma to God or gifts to develop. So for some people, it may even not in this lifetime that they're meant to be, that they're going to connect with their twin flame or whatever. But they can have beautiful soul-mate relationships, right? Or sometimes, we need to go through a certain period with certain relationships before we can attain this higher, conscious relationship and whatnot, because these are the lessons we need to learn, like sometimes we're meant to be more alone, like Tom said before, for a period of time before we can enter. But because we have lost our inner connection, our own connection to our wholeness, basically, which is our connection to spirit, our own sovereign self, then we, always look outside for guidance and then, get and project outwardly and just get information, especially in this day and age, get all this mental information. And that's what I notice nowadays with the internet. Everybody's the head is disconnected from the body, like on the basic level. And maybe I'm biased because I'm a body worker, but people are not really embodied anymore, grounded. It's almost the soul is not fully anchored in the body. And if the soul is not fully anchored, it's like it creates holes in the aura, like where other entities can attach themselves through others, through their frequency. And, as long as we work on embodiment and withholding our frequency, then we are not subjected to these attacks that are not even attracted to people who may carry these entities, right? Because we are whole within ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. There is a case I would like to share with you because it's really relevant to what we are talking right now. It's this lady who I met also in the Twin Flame group, and she told me that she had a very good relationship with a guy, and they were actually, she felt like they were twin flame soulmates, whatever you want to call. They were very good to each other. But the guy got very much swept into the channelings, and he said that he was the incarnation of Ashtar. And, well, he was very much into that. And then that entity started saying to him that he had to leave this woman and that he had to get with another woman. And the guy was very much in love with the first woman, but he said, well, you know what, I'm going to have to leave you because I'm embodying the energy of Ashtar. We have a mission in this place, in this planet, and I'm supposed to be with my true twin flame. And the lady said, well, I thought that we were twin flames. And he said, no, because my higher self, this entity, is saying to me that it's someone else. And he already told me who that person is. And I'm leaving you. And he left her. And now he's with the other lady, and they're doing channeling work for these entities together.
Wow.
Well, I've heard that they give them positive perks if they help them in their agenda. Like I've heard that in some alien love bites where if they helped promote the alien agenda of a lot of the false positivists, new agey stuff, then they would actually set them up in a relationship where they got the positive perks out of it. But once they challenged the authority of these beings that would giving them messages, then all hell would break loose, basically, and the relationship would be destroyed or weird things would happen. So sometimes it works out if you help promote the agenda, you know.
So how to deprogram, how to escape, how to deprogram, and then embark on healing.
Watching those ego hooks of being a special messenger, right? Or an incarnation of who God knows.
Yeah.
I think something we mentioned, I think Laura, you actually mentioned our last Alien Love Bite webinar, which was also where you worked for me. I think we've addressed it briefly. It's about just starving them, you know, not acting on these compulsions, you know what I mean? That's really like not giving food to that.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes harder, easier said than done, but that's on the basic level what people can do, right? Not giving
it's
into
slowly disengaging.
Yeah.
So once you start realizing, you start slowly disengaging, and this way it doesn't send off alarm bells to the entities, and then because that would create another entirely different type of hoovering. So if you just slowly withdraw until the point where you create enough safe distance to unplug.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Action. Very good. Because if you do it too fast, it activates the entity to pull you back in or to create another drama that you can't always disengage from because you're still in their game. And so it's really learning how to be like the perfect operative on disengaging without really getting them too triggered, and also understanding what agreements of entrapment are in operation through this relationship or through this connection. And sometimes you only know in hindsight, like, okay, now I realize why this happens, because this was the agreement of entrapment that got this thing started. Okay, now I realize it, so I'm going to slowly disengage, but you have to do it in a way where it doesn't get the entity all triggered, because it'll get triggered and they'll create a fight with you or a drama or a huge situation that'll pull you in and make you look bad. And it's amazing watching these things now. So it's really learning how to set those boundaries in a way where you don't mind, you know, just disengaging and then re-engaging with people who are more in alignment with the more clean, spontaneous spirit energy as opposed to the counterfeit. And you really have to know the difference because you know what it is inside yourself, you know.
And also re-engaging when it's the counterfeit, it's always surrounded by drama. Conflict and creating anything to get you back in. So yeah.
No, I think that's some good points that we could probably close with, unless there's anything else we want to bring up for the last like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Is there anything else?
One thing that came to me, I think we addressed it before, but careful of falling into victim consciousness. You know, which I think can actually just recreate the traps of agreement of putting yourself on just a, you know, and then, you know, like gets self-diminishment basically, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the victim consciousness is huge, and I would think some people call it learned helplessness programming, which was really described in the early days of the recovery movement when there was alcoholics and co-alcoholics and the codependency, and how, let's say, the co-alcoholic or the one who was, let's say, living with an abuser, actually the reason why they were always a victim is because of learned helplessness. They grew up learning how to not fight back. They just never could. So it's like, it's a conditioning that takes place sometimes over time. And you see that more in like adult children of alcoholics, or women who married an abuser and was married for many years, and they developed like learned helplessness. And so that actually just recreates the situation over and over. So it's really having to learn how to say no and set boundaries and do things differently, and not do the yes, but it's always their fault, blaming. Yeah, that gets really tiring, let me tell you. So it's sometimes you have to hear some negative things about yourself in order to change course and get out of that victim programming.
Which is learned codependency.
Even if we've been in bad relationships, like, oops, we're on, okay. Yeah, even if we've been in bad relationships, there's always some part that we played in it, you know, and you got to take responsibility for whether it was your own naivete and, you know, youthful stupidness, whatever, and just learn from it. Just get whatever positive you can get out of it. Try to turn it into something positive and just move on to greener pastures, you know, instead of, you know, blaming everybody else and you're just the victim. It's always being targeted. And, you know, it's not just a love bite. You see that with the gang stalking people, which we've all talked about. You know, that whole victim where it's just they take no responsibility for whatever role that they may have played in things, you know. And even if it's just naivete or stupidity, just take responsibility for that, you know, and move on. And it just,
I think that's the key, and also distinguishing between a person who you may think is your love bite, but may not be as well, if they're willing to take responsibility. You know, they may be more fractured than you. Either way, both partners are all suffering core wounds that stem, you know, into abandonment issues, all of it, like everything that we all feel. One will always feel it more, but I think the difference, the distinguishing factor will always come down to if the person really, really genuinely wants to help themselves and not be a victim of whatever they're going through, whether they're like possessed or not, whatever is happening. It all comes down to them not wanting to be a victim of it and choosing to do something different. I think when they don't do that and they give into what is driving them, that is a sure sign that they are like definitely your love bite.
Or make them a victim as well. It'll recreate the victimization.
Yeah.
You know that. I just want to say there was the one thing that helped me in my life was, you know, I went through the process of like getting really, really angry and spinning in anger and blaming the other person, and then getting angry and blaming myself, and then trying to be perfect, and that wouldn't work. And really what had to happen is I just had to grieve the loss of whatever was lost, which was years of my life. And then self-forgiveness, actually it was a realization that things couldn't have been any different considering the situations at hand. And that realization of knowing it couldn't really have gone any different, and learning from all of that gave me the self-forgiveness and just the acceptance to deal with it and to not get caught up in it again. But it had to happen in a real way, where there was a deep realization that it really couldn't have been done any different. And I'm not saying it to justify the victimization, but it was a certain element of self-forgiveness had to take place after the grieving. So I think the grieving process is really important. And that's actually one thing that a lot of people don't want to do in the healing process. They avoid it like the plague. But really what we're dealing with is even if there's grief, it's a loss of an illusion, but it's still grief. And it's still very real.
Very important. I can relate to that, the grieving process and self-forgiveness, because I tend to be hard on myself, beat myself up. And even when Carissa was sharing about her first relationship, how she kind of felt like, you know, how you were beating yourself up, or kind of looking back like, how could I get myself into that? I have the same thing, but I need to look back, like you just said, like, okay, this is just what needed to happen in that moment. My own naivety, blind spots, it's just that's where I was at. Now, obviously, it makes more sense. And I'm like, looking back, why didn't anybody slap me in my face when it happened? You know, wake up. So, but that's how I, you know, again, like I truly believe in the idea that, you know, there's a lessons in a sense, you know, and to help us if we can, you know, even Tom, you wrote about it on I think, your article, The Art of Hyperdimensional War, to utilize these entities as teachers in a sense, because they do target our blind spots and weaknesses, right?
Yeah. When I talked about permission earlier, when these entities do what they do, it's not, basically it's a, how do you reconcile that with the idea that you might have some sort of a metaphysical protection system? How do you reconcile the fact that they can do certain things and yet we're supposed to have protection in some case? Well, the reason I think that is because certain things are allowed if there's a potential for us to benefit in the end from it, a type of benefit that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't go through that risky situation. So, a lot of times when these negative situations end up having a positive purpose in the end, it's not because all along it was just positive entities creating this mess just to get you to be more involved. No, I mean, it really was a dangerous situation. It's just that on the other side, part of it could have been allowed just because there was a potential for you, if you do your part in being aware and kind of making it through in one piece, that you can benefit from it. So
benefit in a major way where it just completely backfires on them.
Yeah, I mean they enter into a gamble, which is if they succeed, then you become weaker, but if they lose, then you become way stronger. So and they risk helping you in the end if they don't succeed in their plans. That's sort of the deal there. And what that implies is that whatever negative situation you're going through, there might be a hidden doorway to a bonus level, I guess you could say. There's a silver lining there if you play it smart and don't give in to the manipulations.
Nice.
Really well said. Well, is there anything else that we want to add?
Well, if I could just give, let's say, three in general, just to maybe a little bit wrap it up about my experiences, that I would tell people basically, number one, please avoid gurus, avoid the kind of people that might indoctrinate you with a lot of information that might be coming from entities, or which is not really true, because there are many psychics, gurus, and people out there who are really basically, playing games, mental games with people, and they're messing other people's life, and they're bringing a lot of bad consequences and havoc to their lives. So I would say trust more your intuition and not really that much what a guru or an ET that is being channeled, or you have to really try to trust more your own intuition. And to do spiritual work, I did a lot of spiritual work of reconnection to my own soul, to myself. In my case, I did a lot of work also with Jesus Christ. I know that some people might think that it's more like some kind of avatar or maybe archetype, but it worked for me. I just wanted to also throw that in, and basically learning self-empowerment and not being so afraid of these entities, because as Laura said and Eve said, they are not that powerful.
And also be careful of healers, because often they're just utilized to reparasite you and get you reimplanted for your, dire mission. For the one that's connected to, the Dark Lord and the mate, the love bite. It really does come down to exactly what you said, Areja, that it has to come from within you. And then what Tom said, Bernard and James, all of us, it has to come from within us. We have to listen to all our senses, our body, our intuition, what we really, and know the difference between the artificial overlay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the intuition part, this is the one thing that's kind of difficult. I don't know if it's more in the Western culture, but everybody's so individualistic and self-driven that a lot of times people think, oh, I'm just following my heart, following my intuition, but really what's operating sometimes is what we call the overlay of the psychological defenses or the interdimensional beings or the programs running them. So it can be a touchy subject, because sometimes you could see, like as a therapist, you could see, okay, I see something else operating, but they think they're following their heart, and their soul. But really a deeper amount of healing has to take place, and the only way that can happen is to be humble enough to be willing to really ask your deeper self by letting go, even temporarily, of what you think is absolutely right, but just to allow that to emerge in your experience. Because it will emerge when you're humble enough to release whatever's blocking that. It will come to you. So just know that.
That's a really good point, because I also said before, we all agreed really trusting and following our intuition, but it's also being misused or misapplied. especially in New Age, or the saying, just follow your, just do what you feel like doing. That difference, you tell a heroin addict to do just what he feels like doing, right? That doesn't really help him. Or the idea of resonating, for example, resonating with a certain teaching or book, but there's truth to it, but we need to tune our reading instrument, what the information with our own discernment on all levels to what part of us is resonating with it. Maybe, a programmed conditioned self. I mean, a lot of fundamentalist Christians resonate with the Bible, and that you feel really the truth in it, and that the earth is only 5,000 years old. We see the same applied in New Age, how people resonate with a lot of very questionable channel material or other material, right? Just because it feels good doesn't mean it's true, for example.
Right. Like
That's the key,
and,
the not feeling.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned with a friend that I spent some time with a couple of weeks ago was that I realized in hindsight that my fears actually saved me, and that a lot of my fears were actually coming from my spirit and from my intuition, but I was judging myself and I was allowing others to judge me for being, fear-based, this and that. But I realized in hindsight that it absolutely saved me. So now I listen to everything that I'm feeling and still just try to be open to, am I projecting, am I defending, what's really going on here, and really give it time to just till I know what's really true.
There's a feeling that in psychology, which Evie, where a person who is in a dire situation or feels like they're in danger, they have this sensation of this real fluttering. It's that real sense of danger, even though you may not see what's going on, but yet it's a subconscious response within you. And I say, listen to that. If you have that feeling, listen to that.
What's a psychic attack? I've had
love fights. Don't listen to that. Love fight people don't listen to that. Listen to that.
Yeah, you're right.
Even if you feel euphoria and you have that like fear, fluttery thing you can't explain, listen to what that is. That is a warning sign, big one.
Yeah. Okay.
We did 4 hours.
Yeah, I think we're
wow.
Yeah, it's long enough. Maybe it's time to close and just thank everybody. And I know there's things that we didn't even touch upon, but we could always save that for another time. And I just want to thank everybody who's on the panel with all their personal experiences and their in-depth knowledge. And this has been wonderful. So thank you. And
yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone. That was beautiful.
To do this with all of you. It's been fun too.
Thank you for the invitation, and trust me, it has been an honor to be with all of you, because I was really following your work, and you have been a lifesaver. Really.
Nice.
And Evie, you are like front line. You've come up with. Before that, where was any of this information really?
Well, thank you for Barbie, and Barbie was the one who saved me. So, there was always somebody else before us.
Yeah.
Yeah, same me too. So we're just passing the torch.
Yeah.
And I really got a kick out of this. Thank you for including me. We'll catch up later. But take care.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good day.
Bye, everyone.